It was the summer of 2019 when I decided to go camping alone in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. I was 28, had been camping a handful of times before, and thought I knew enough to handle myself. The forest was thick, filled with towering firs and moss-covered rocks, and the air smelled fresh but damp from recent rains. I wanted to escape the city noise, the endless emails, and just spend a few days with nature. Quiet, peaceful, and alone. I drove 3 hours out of town, following a narrow dirt road until my car hit a rough patch, and I parked at a small clearing near a trailhead. I had my backpack with all the usual gear: tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small first aid kit, and a flashlight. I was well prepared, or so I thought. I started walking down the trail just before noon. The path was narrow and winding, barely visible in places under fallen leaves and pine needles. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. The deeper I went, the quieter it got, except for the occasional snap of a twig or the distant call of a crow. I found a spot about 5 miles in, a small clearing near a creek, perfect for setting up camp. The ground was soft, covered in pine needles, and the trees around were tall, their branches blocking much of the sunlight. I spent the afternoon pitching my tent, gathering some dry wood for a fire, and filling my water bottle from the creek after filtering it. The creek was shallow and cold, the water moving swiftly over smooth rocks. As I worked, I kept noticing small signs: broken branches, some flattened grass, like something had moved through the area recently, but I told myself it was probably deer or other wildlife. Nothing unusual for the forest. Night fell quickly. I lit a small campfire, the flames crackling and throwing warm light onto the trees. I cooked some canned beans and a piece of bread I had brought along. After eating, I cleaned up and settled into my sleeping bag, close enough to the fire to feel its heat, but far enough to be safe. Around midnight, everything was still except the sound of the fire and the water trickling nearby. Suddenly, I heard a sharp crack not far from my camp. I froze, my heart racing. It sounded like a heavy branch breaking underfoot. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam over the dark trees, but saw nothing. No movement, no eyes reflecting back. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Minutes later, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the underbrush just beyond the firelight. The noise wasn't like an animal's. It was heavier, more controlled, like a person walking carefully. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that other campers or hikers might be around, though the area was rarely visited this late at night. I zipped up the tent and turned off the fire. Inside the tent, I felt small and vulnerable, my ears straining for any sound. The footsteps circled the camp slowly, stopping every now and then. At one point, the noise paused, and I thought I heard a low, muffled grunt or cough. The footsteps moved away, then back again, circling my tent in the dark. I remembered I had a pocket knife clipped to my belt and a small flashlight. I tried to stay quiet, breathing softly but steadily to keep myself calm. The footsteps continued for what felt like hours, moving back and forth, never coming too close, but never leaving either. At dawn, the footsteps finally stopped. The forest woke up with bird songs and the light slowly brightening. I unzipped the tent and peeked out. The fire was out, the wood cold and gray. On the ground near my tent were fresh footprints. Large, heavy prints that didn't match any animal I knew. They were human-like, but bigger, wider, and deeper, as if whoever made them weighed well over 200 pounds. The prints circled the entire camp, going into the trees but never far from the clearing. I packed up quickly, my hands trembling. I decided not to stay another night. I followed the trail back to my car, keeping my eyes and ears open. Every snap of a twig, every rustle made me jump. I kept glancing behind me but never saw anyone or anything. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors immediately and sat inside, heart still pounding. I called the local ranger station and reported the strange footprints and the footsteps I heard around my camp. The ranger told me that there had been reports of people living illegally in the forests, sometimes hiding from the law or avoiding contact. They warned me to be careful and avoid camping alone in remote areas. The whole experience stayed with me. The fear wasn't from some ghost or monster. It was the real threat of someone or something human, lurking, watching, unknown, and close enough to be dangerous. I never went back to that part of the forest again. It was the summer of 2019 when I decided to go camping alone in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. I was 28, had been camping a handful of times before, and thought I knew enough to handle myself. The forest was thick, filled with towering firs and moss-covered rocks, and the air smelled fresh but damp from recent rains. I wanted to escape the city noise, the endless emails, and just spend a few days with nature. Quiet, peaceful, and alone. I drove 3 hours out of town, following a narrow dirt road until my car hit a rough patch, and I parked at a small clearing near a trailhead. I had my backpack with all the usual gear: tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small first aid kit, and a flashlight. I was well prepared, or so I thought. I started walking down the trail just before noon. The path was narrow and winding, barely visible in places under fallen leaves and pine needles. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. The deeper I went, the quieter it got, except for the occasional snap of a twig or the distant call of a crow. I found a spot about 5 miles in, a small clearing near a creek, perfect for setting up camp. The ground was soft, covered in pine needles, and the trees around were tall, their branches blocking much of the sunlight. I spent the afternoon pitching my tent, gathering some dry wood for a fire, and filling my water bottle from the creek after filtering it. The creek was shallow and cold, the water moving swiftly over smooth rocks. As I worked, I kept noticing small signs: broken branches, some flattened grass, like something had moved through the area recently, but I told myself it was probably deer or other wildlife. Nothing unusual for the forest. Night fell quickly. I lit a small campfire, the flames crackling and throwing warm light onto the trees. I cooked some canned beans and a piece of bread I had brought along. After eating, I cleaned up and settled into my sleeping bag, close enough to the fire to feel its heat, but far enough to be safe. Around midnight, everything was still except the sound of the fire and the water trickling nearby. Suddenly, I heard a sharp crack not far from my camp. I froze, my heart racing. It sounded like a heavy branch breaking underfoot. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam over the dark trees, but saw nothing. No movement, no eyes reflecting back. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Minutes later, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the underbrush just beyond the firelight. The noise wasn't like an animal's. It was heavier, more controlled, like a person walking carefully. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that other campers or hikers might be around, though the area was rarely visited this late at night. I zipped up the tent and turned off the fire. Inside the tent, I felt small and vulnerable, my ears straining for any sound. The footsteps circled the camp slowly, stopping every now and then. At one point, the noise paused, and I thought I heard a low, muffled grunt or cough. The footsteps moved away, then back again, circling my tent in the dark. I remembered I had a pocket knife clipped to my belt and a small flashlight. I tried to stay quiet, breathing softly but steadily to keep myself calm. The footsteps continued for what felt like hours, moving back and forth, never coming too close, but never leaving either. At dawn, the footsteps finally stopped. The forest woke up with bird songs and the light slowly brightening. I unzipped the tent and peeked out. The fire was out, the wood cold and gray. On the ground near my tent were fresh footprints. Large, heavy prints that didn't match any animal I knew. They were human-like, but bigger, wider, and deeper, as if whoever made them weighed well over 200 pounds. The prints circled the entire camp, going into the trees but never far from the clearing. I packed up quickly, my hands trembling. I decided not to stay another night. I followed the trail back to my car, keeping my eyes and ears open. Every snap of a twig, Every rustle made me jump. I kept glancing behind me but never saw anyone or anything. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors immediately and sat inside, heart still pounding. I called the local ranger station and reported the strange footprints and the footsteps I heard around my camp. The ranger told me that there had been reports of people living illegally in the forests, sometimes hiding from the law or avoiding contact. They warned me to be careful and avoid camping alone in remote areas. The whole experience stayed with me. The fear wasn't from some ghost or monster. It was the real threat of someone or something human, lurking, watching, unknown, and close enough to be dangerous. I never went back to that part of the forest again. I decided to go camping alone in the summer of 2018. I wanted to escape the city noise and spend a few days in the wilderness. I packed my old backpack with the basics: a small tent, sleeping bag, a few cans of food, water bottles, a flashlight, and a pocket knife. The place I chose was a forest about 50 miles north of my hometown, somewhere quiet and away from the usual crowded campsites. I had been there once as a kid but never stayed overnight. The idea of solitude felt like a good challenge. I arrived late afternoon after a 2-hour drive. The sky was clear, and the sun was still warm on my skin. The forest was dense with tall pine and oak trees, the ground covered in dry leaves and pine needles. I found a small clearing near a stream and set up my tent there. It was an easy spot to camp. Flat ground, access to water, and some fallen logs nearby to sit on. The sounds of birds and the gentle flow of the stream made everything feel peaceful. I was looking forward to the quiet night ahead. As I was arranging my things, I noticed the forest around me seemed unusually still. No wind moved the leaves, and even the birds had stopped chirping. At first, I thought it was normal. Maybe they sensed the coming dusk. But then, a strange feeling settled over me, a tightness in my chest like something was off. I shrugged it off and lit a small campfire, feeling the warmth as the sky darkened. I sat near the fire and ate some canned beans. The crackling of the fire and the smell of burning wood filled the air. It was the kind of night you imagine when you think of camping: calm, simple, away from the rush of everyday life. I decided to explore a little before going to sleep, so I grabbed my flashlight and followed the stream upstream. The beam of my flashlight bounced between the trees, casting long shadows. The forest seemed bigger at night, endless and mysterious. About 20 minutes in, I noticed something unusual. The footprints on the soft ground along the stream were fresh but unfamiliar. They were large, definitely not mine or any animal I knew. I followed the prints carefully, my heart beating a little faster. The prints led to a small clearing with a broken tree branch lying across it. Nearby, I saw some discarded trash, a half-empty bottle, a torn piece of cloth. It was clear that someone else had been here recently. My mind raced through possibilities. A lost hiker? A hunter? Maybe even someone camping nearby without a proper site. I didn't like the thought of strangers so close in such a remote place. I quickly turned back, deciding to head to my tent. As I walked, I heard a faint rustling behind me, like someone moving quietly through the trees. I stopped and turned slowly, shining my flashlight into the darkness. Nothing moved, just the shifting shadows of leaves. I felt a cold sweat on my back and started walking faster, my eyes darting through the blackness. Back at the camp, I tried to calm myself. I checked my phone, no signal, of course. I realized how isolated I truly was. The fire was dying, so I added some wood, watching the flames flicker. Then I noticed the footprints again, right near the edge of my campsite. They hadn't been there before. Someone had been close. Panic began to creep in. I grabbed my pocket knife and sat with my back against a tree, listening for any sound. The forest was silent except for the crackling fire. Minutes passed like hours. Suddenly, I heard a faint snapping of a twig nearby. My heart jumped to my throat. I turned the flashlight toward the sound and caught a quick glimpse of movement. Something or someone retreating into the shadows. I didn't try to follow. Instead, I gathered my things quickly and decided to leave. The idea of spending the night there suddenly felt dangerous. I packed up the tent in record time, the cold night air making my hands shake. I kept my flashlight on, shining it ahead as I moved toward the car, the path now feeling unfamiliar and threatening. As I hurried through the trees, the rustling noises followed me, always just out of clear sight. My mind tried to convince me it was an animal, but the feeling of being watched was too strong. I kept looking over my shoulder, heart racing, every step feeling heavier. When I finally reached the clearing where I had parked, relief washed over me. I jumped in the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. I could still hear faint noises outside, but they slowly faded as I drove away. The next morning, back in town, I reported what happened to the local ranger station. They told me that the forest area was known for some illegal hunting and poaching activity. Sometimes, people used those remote spots for dangerous things, staying hidden from the public and authorities. No one officially camped there alone at night for safety reasons. I realized how close I had come to running into those people. I could have been in real danger if I hadn't noticed the footprints or if I had stayed calm. That night taught me that the forest is wild not just because of nature, but because of the people who hide inside it. My trip wasn't just a quiet escape. It was a reminder that sometimes the scariest things are real and close by, not from stories or imagination. Since then, I never camped alone in such remote places. I stick to known campsites with people around. The feeling of that night, the silence, the footprints, the unseen watcher has stayed with me. It's a warning that sometimes being alone in nature means being vulnerable not to animals or ghosts, but to other humans whose intentions you can't always guess. That summer trip was supposed to be peaceful, but it ended with a deep respect for the forest and the people who roam it unseen. The clear ending for me was simple. Some places are better left unexplored alone after dark. Safety matters more than solitude, and sometimes running away is the smartest choice you can make. It was the summer of 2019 when I decided to go camping alone in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. I was 28, had been camping a handful of times before, and thought I knew enough to handle myself. The forest was thick, filled with towering firs and moss-covered rocks, and the air smelled fresh but damp from recent rains. I wanted to escape the city noise, the endless emails, and just spend a few days with nature, quiet, peaceful, and alone. I drove 3 hours out of town, following a narrow dirt road until my car hit a rough patch, and I parked at a small clearing near a trailhead. I had my backpack with all the usual gear: tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small first aid kit, and a flashlight. I was well prepared, or so I thought. I started walking down the trail just before noon. The path was narrow and winding, barely visible in places under fallen leaves and pine needles. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. The deeper I went, the quieter it got, except for the occasional snap of a twig or the distant call of a crow. I found a spot about 5 miles in, a small clearing near a creek, perfect for setting up camp. The ground was soft, covered in pine needles, and the trees around were tall, their branches blocking much of the sunlight. I spent the afternoon pitching my tent, gathering some dry wood for a fire, and filling my water bottle from the creek after filtering it. The creek was shallow and cold, the water moving swiftly over smooth rocks. As I worked, I kept noticing small signs: broken branches, some flattened grass, like something had moved through the area recently, but I told myself it was probably deer or other wildlife. Nothing unusual for the forest. Night fell quickly. I lit a small campfire, the flames crackling and throwing warm light onto the trees. I cooked some canned beans and a piece of bread I had brought along. After eating, I cleaned up and settled into my sleeping bag, close enough to the fire to feel its heat, but far enough to be safe. Around midnight, everything was still except the sound of the fire and the water trickling nearby. Suddenly, I heard a sharp crack not far from my camp. I froze, my heart racing. It sounded like a heavy branch breaking underfoot. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam over the dark trees but saw nothing. No movement, no eyes reflecting back. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Minutes later, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the underbrush just beyond the firelight. The noise wasn't like an animal's. It was heavier, more controlled, like a person walking carefully. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that other campers or hikers might be around, though the area was rarely visited this late at night. I zipped up the tent and turned off the fire. Inside the tent, I felt small and vulnerable, my ears straining for any sound. The footsteps circled the camp slowly, stopping every now and then. At one point, the noise paused, and I thought I heard a low, muffled grunt or cough. The footsteps moved away, then back again, circling my tent in the dark. I remembered I had a pocket knife clipped to my belt and a small flashlight. I tried to stay quiet, breathing softly but steadily to keep myself calm. The footsteps continued for what felt like hours, moving back and forth, never coming too close, but never leaving either. At dawn, the footsteps finally stopped. The forest woke up with bird songs and the light slowly brightening. I unzipped the tent and peeked out. The fire was out, the wood cold and gray. On the ground near my tent were fresh footprints. Large, heavy prints that didn't match any animal I knew. They were human-like, but bigger, wider, and deeper, as if whoever made them weighed well over 200 pounds. The prints circled the entire camp, going into the trees but never far from the clearing. I packed up quickly, my hands trembling. I decided not to stay another night. I followed the trail back to my car, keeping my eyes and ears open. Every snap of a twig, every rustle made me jump. I kept glancing behind me but never saw anyone or anything. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors immediately and sat inside, heart still pounding. I called the local ranger station and reported the strange footprints and the footsteps I heard around my camp. The ranger told me that there had been reports of people living illegally in the forests, sometimes hiding from the law or avoiding contact. They warned me to be careful and avoid camping alone in remote areas. The whole experience stayed with me. The fear wasn't from some ghost or monster. It was the real threat of someone or something human, lurking, watching, unknown, and close enough to be dangerous. I never went back to that part of the forest again. I remember the summer of 2017 when I decided to take a solo camping trip deep into the forests of northern Maine. I was 28, fresh out of a tough year at work, and craving some real solitude. No phone, no distractions, just me and the wilderness. I picked a spot near Baxter State Park, far enough from any marked trail or campground, where I thought I could really be alone. I had been camping before, but never this far off the beaten path. I packed my gear carefully. A small tent, a sleeping bag rated for cold nights, enough food for 3 days, a sturdy backpack, a couple of water bottles, a map, compass, and a basic first aid kit. I left early in the morning, driving a long dirt road until the pavement disappeared, then hiking in for almost 5 miles with my pack heavy on my back. The forest was thick and quiet, mostly pine and spruce, the ground covered with a soft layer of needles. The air smelled fresh and sharp. By late afternoon, I found a small clearing beside a slow-moving stream. The light was golden, filtering through the tall trees. I set up my tent carefully, making sure it was level and that the rainfly was secure. Then I gathered some dry wood for a fire and cleaned a spot nearby. I wanted to cook some dehydrated meals and boil water. The forest around me felt peaceful but also immense, like I was just a small part of a much larger world. After dinner, I sat by the fire, the flames crackling and throwing flickering shadows on the trees. The quiet was almost total except for the soft splash of the stream and the occasional bird or insect. I felt calm, my body tired but happy. I double-checked my gear, rolled into my sleeping bag, and zipped myself into the tent. The night was cool, but not cold. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound. At first, it was faint, a rustling, like leaves being crushed underfoot. My heart sped up a little, but I told myself it was probably a deer or some small animal moving near the camp. I stayed still and listened. The noise stopped after a few seconds, and the forest went silent again. I tried to get back to sleep. About an hour later, the rustling came again, louder this time. It was definitely footsteps. Slow, heavy, and careful, like someone or something was trying not to make noise but couldn't quite pull it off. My mind raced through possibilities. A hiker? No, that would be strange this deep in the woods. And besides, I had told no one where I was going. A wild animal? Maybe a bear? But bears usually make more noise when they move. I felt a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. I unzipped the tent just a crack and peered outside. The fire had burned low but was still glowing orange, the smoke drifting upwards in the cold air. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. I didn't see anything at first. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. About 20 feet away, something large was crouched low, barely visible in the firelight. It wasn't a deer or any animal I could name. It was humanoid, wearing dark clothes that blended with the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. The figure moved slowly, as if watching me, but never stepping into the light. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it might give me away. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it in its direction. The beam hit the figure's face briefly. Rough skin, scruffy beard, tired eyes that glinted with a strange intensity. The man froze, then dropped out of sight into the shadows. I sat back down inside the tent, trying to calm myself. Whoever he was, he wasn't making any aggressive moves. Maybe a lost hunter? Or someone else camping nearby. But why hadn't I heard him come in? Why hadn't I seen any other campsite or tracks around? I decided not to leave the tent again that night. I stayed awake, listening for more sounds, flashlight close in my hand. The footsteps came and went, circling around my camp, but the man never tried to get closer than a few dozen feet. The whole night stretched on in a blur of anxiety and silence. When dawn finally broke, pale and gray, the figure was gone. I packed quickly, keeping my eyes open as I retraced my steps. The forest felt different now, tense and watchful, like I had disturbed something I shouldn't have. On the way back to the trailhead, I found fresh footprints in the dirt, large and deep, heading the same direction as me. They weren't animal tracks. They were human. When I got back to my car, I was relieved but also uneasy. I reported the encounter to the local ranger station. They told me it was unusual to find someone so deep in the forest without telling anyone, but not unheard of. They suggested I be more careful next time and always let someone know where I was. Looking back now, I understand what happened. That man was probably a hunter or a trapper, someone used to living in the woods alone for long stretches. He likely didn't expect anyone else to be out there. Maybe he was watching me to see if I was a threat or just curious. Whatever his reasons, I was lucky nothing worse happened. This experience taught me a lot about how wild the forest really is. Not just the animals or the weather, but the people too. The woods aren't empty, even when you think they are. There are stories and lives woven into the trees and shadows. I still love camping, but now I carry that memory as a warning and a reminder to respect the wilderness, and the unknown lives within it. It was the summer of 2019 when I decided to take a solo camping trip deep in the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. I was 27 at the time, looking for a break from the endless buzz of city life and hoping to find some peace in the quiet wilderness. I camped a few times before, but always with friends, so this was different. I packed my gear carefully: tent, sleeping bag, food supplies, water filter, and a sturdy backpack, and headed out with a map and a compass, determined to keep everything simple and old school. I arrived late afternoon and picked a clearing about 2 miles off the main trail, a spot I'd found on an old map, away from any marked campsites. The forest was dense, thick with tall pines and oaks, the ground carpeted with dry leaves and moss. I could hear the soft hum of insects, the occasional bird call, and the wind rustling through the branches. The smell was a mix of damp earth, pine resin, and a faint hint of smoke from a campfire someone had long ago left behind. It was quiet but alive. Setting up my tent took longer than I expected. The ground was uneven, scattered with roots and rocks, but I managed. I arranged my gear neatly inside and started gathering wood for a fire. I liked fires. They felt like an anchor, a safe spot in the vast wilderness. I found dry twigs and branches, enough to get a good blaze going once the sun began to dip below the horizon. As the sun set, the sky turned a deep orange, then purple and finally black. The stars began to peek out, countless and bright. I lit the fire carefully, watching the flames flicker and crackle. It warmed the chill that settled as night approached. I ate some simple food, a sandwich and some nuts, then settled close to the fire, feeling the small circle of light pushing back the darkness. After a while, the sounds of the forest changed. The daytime birds fell silent, replaced by the nighttime chorus of crickets, frogs, and owls. There was a sense of stillness, but also tension, as if the forest was watching. I reminded myself that this was normal, part of the wilderness experience. Around 10 p.m., the fire was dying down, just glowing embers now. I decided to lie back in my sleeping bag, leaving the fire mostly out to avoid attracting animals. I didn't want to use my flashlight unless I had to. The darkness felt complete, wrapping around me like a thick blanket. That's when I first heard the noise. At first, it was faint, a low, dragging sound coming from somewhere beyond the tree line. It wasn't a howl or a growl, but something heavier, slower, like something large moving carefully but with purpose. I held my breath and strained to listen. The noise stopped. I thought maybe it was a deer or some other animal, but deer don't drag their feet or make that kind of scraping sound on dry leaves and twigs. Minutes passed. Then the noise started again, closer this time. It moved in a slow, steady rhythm, like something or someone was pacing the edge of the clearing. I stayed still, my heart beating fast but trying not to panic. I thought about my options. I had a pocket knife, a small folding blade I always carried. My phone was in airplane mode, no signal out here. If whatever it was wanted to attack, I had only myself to rely on. The noise stopped again. I could barely breathe. Then suddenly a sharp snap, like a branch breaking, came from the right side of the clearing. I tensed, eyes scanning the darkness just beyond the firelight. My mind raced through possibilities. A bear? A wild boar? But neither made sounds like slow dragging footsteps. It was too methodical, too deliberate. I remembered reading about human poachers or illegal hunters using the forest. People who didn't want to be found. My skin crawled. Suddenly, my ear caught a faint crunching sound behind me. I froze, unable to turn quickly in the small tense space. The idea of someone creeping up behind me felt terrifying. I gripped my knife tighter. The night pressed in around me. Then, I heard breathing low and uneven, coming from just outside the tent flap. I didn't move. I stayed silent, praying whoever or whatever it was would leave. The breathing stopped. Minutes passed. Then I heard something shift. A faint scrape, like fabric brushing against bark. Whoever it was, they were close, just beyond the thin fabric of my tent. Panic flooded me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I checked my watch. Almost midnight. I thought about the safety rules I'd read. Stay in your tent, don't shine lights, don't make noise. I reached for my phone quietly, ready to turn it on and call for help, but no signal. The breathing came back, slower now, almost like the person was waiting. I realized they weren't making any attempt to hurt me, at least not yet. Maybe they were just lost or watching. Then came a sudden noise, a loud rustling, followed by the sharp crack of a branch breaking about 20 feet away. The person moved fast, running into the woods. I waited for what felt like hours before I dared to step out. The forest was still, the moon high above shining down cold silver light. I could see footprints in the dirt. Heavy, booted prints, dragging marks on the side, like something was pulled or dropped. I packed up immediately, not wasting a second. I stuffed everything into my backpack, snuffed out the fire completely, and started hiking back toward the main trail. The forest that had felt peaceful hours before now felt hostile, every shadow a threat. As I walked, I kept hearing noises behind me. The crunch of leaves, the snap of twigs. Each time I stopped and looked, there was nothing. but the feeling of being followed was overwhelming. After nearly 2 hours, I finally reached a ranger station near the forest edge, where I found help and reported the strange noises and footprints. The rangers told me there had been reports of illegal hunters or poachers in the area, some dangerous, some armed, and they had been tracking them for months. They said it was lucky I hadn't made noise or tried to confront whoever was nearby. I was told to always carry a whistle and to camp in official sites, never alone in unmarked areas. That night taught me something important about the wilderness. The forest isn't just trees and animals. Sometimes, it hides people who don't want to be found. And those people can be as dangerous as any wild creature. The whole experience left me shaken, but it also made me respect the forest more deeply. It's not a place for careless adventurers. It demands caution, awareness, and respect. I never went camping alone again, and I always made sure to tell someone where I was going. That trip, for all its fear, taught me how quickly things can change when you step into the wild, how easy it is to feel small and vulnerable. But it also reminded me that real danger isn't always what you expect. Sometimes, it's the sound of slow, dragging footsteps just beyond your firelight, in the cold, dark silence of the woods. It was the summer of 2019 when I decided to go camping alone in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. I was 28, had been camping a handful of times before, and thought I knew enough to handle myself. The forest was thick, filled with towering firs and moss-covered rocks, and the air smelled fresh but damp from recent rains. I wanted to escape the city noise, the endless emails, and just spend a few days with nature, quiet, peaceful, and alone. I drove 3 hours out of town, following a narrow dirt road until my car hit a rough patch, and I parked at a small clearing near a trailhead. I had my backpack with all the usual gear: tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small first aid kit, and a flashlight. I was well prepared, or so I thought. I started walking down the trail just before noon. The path was narrow and winding, barely visible in places under fallen leaves and pine needles. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. The deeper I went, the quieter it got, except for the occasional snap of a twig or the distant call of a crow. I found a spot about 5 miles in, a small clearing near a creek, perfect for setting up camp. The ground was soft, covered in pine needles, and the trees around were tall, their branches blocking much of the sunlight. I spent the afternoon pitching my tent, gathering some dry wood for a fire, and filling my water bottle from the creek after filtering it. The creek was shallow and cold, the water moving swiftly over smooth rocks. As I worked, I kept noticing small signs: broken branches, some flattened grass, like something had moved through the area recently, but I told myself it was probably deer or other wildlife. Nothing unusual for the forest. Night fell quickly. I lit a small campfire, the flames crackling and throwing warm light onto the trees. I cooked some canned beans and a piece of bread I had brought along. After eating, I cleaned up and settled into my sleeping bag, close enough to the fire to feel its heat, but far enough to be safe. Around midnight, everything was still except the sound of the fire and the water trickling nearby. Suddenly, I heard a sharp crack not far from my camp. I froze, my heart racing. It sounded like a heavy branch breaking underfoot. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam over the dark trees, but saw nothing. No movement, no eyes reflecting back. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Minutes later, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the underbrush just beyond the firelight. The noise wasn't like an animal's. It was heavier, more controlled, like a person walking carefully. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that other campers or hikers might be around, though the area was rarely visited this late at night. I zipped up the tent and turned off the fire. Inside the tent, I felt small and vulnerable, my ears straining for any sound. The footsteps circled the camp slowly, stopping every now and then. At one point, the noise paused, and I thought I heard a low, muffled grunt or cough. The footsteps moved away, then back again, circling my tent in the dark. I remembered I had a pocket knife clipped to my belt and a small flashlight. I tried to stay quiet, breathing softly but steadily to keep myself calm. The footsteps continued for what felt like hours, moving back and forth, never coming too close, but never leaving either. At dawn, the footsteps finally stopped. The forest woke up with bird songs and the light slowly brightening. I unzipped the tent and peeked out. The fire was out, the wood cold and gray. On the ground near my tent were fresh footprints. Large, heavy prints that didn't match any animal I knew. They were human-like, but bigger, wider, and deeper, as if whoever made them weighed well over 200 pounds. The prints circled the entire camp, going into the trees but never far from the clearing. I packed up quickly, my hands trembling. I decided not to stay another night. I followed the trail back to my car, keeping my eyes and ears open. Every snap of a twig, every rustle made me jump. I kept glancing behind me but never saw anyone or anything. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors immediately and sat inside, heart still pounding. I called the local ranger station and reported the strange footprints and the footsteps I heard around my camp. The ranger told me that there had been reports of people living illegally in the forests, sometimes hiding from the law or avoiding contact. They warned me to be careful and avoid camping alone in remote areas. The whole experience stayed with me. The fear wasn't from some ghost or monster. It was the real threat of someone or something human, lurking, watching, unknown, and close enough to be dangerous. I never went back to that part of the forest again. I still remember that camping trip like it was yesterday, even though it happened nearly 5 years ago. I was 24 back then, fresh out of college and full of confidence that I could handle just about anything. I decided to go camping alone in the dense woods of northern Michigan, near the Huron-Manistee National Forest. I picked a spot that was supposed to be remote and quiet, a place where I could disconnect from everything for a few days. What I didn't expect was how quickly things would turn from peaceful to terrifying. The first day was perfect. I drove out early in the morning, the air crisp and smelling of pine and earth. The sun was bright, but the forest canopy created patches of shade and light on the forest floor. I found a clearing near a slow-moving creek, the kind of place that seemed untouched. I set up my tent, gathered some dry wood, and built a small campfire just before sunset. The crackling fire, the sound of water, and the gentle rustling of leaves made me feel calm. I ate a simple meal of canned beans warmed over the fire and lay back to watch the stars come out one by one. That night, the forest was alive with sounds I wasn't used to. The distant hoot of an owl, the sharp snap of twigs, and the soft movements of animals in the dark. But nothing felt threatening. I felt safe inside my tent. The second day started with thick fog rolling over the trees, giving everything a soft, gray look. I planned to hike a little deeper into the woods, just to explore. I packed light, water, some snacks, my pocket knife, and a small flashlight. The trail was muddy from recent rains, and the air was damp and cool. As I walked, I noticed how quiet it was. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. Just silence, except for the squelch of my boots in the mud. I decided to take a break by a fallen log, sitting down to drink some water and catch my breath. That's when I noticed something strange. A faint trail of footprints in the mud, larger than mine, and definitely not animal tracks. They were spaced out as if someone was walking slowly but steadily. The footprints led off the trail and deeper into the trees. For a moment, I thought maybe I wasn't alone after all. My heart quickened, but I told myself it was probably just some hikers or hunters. Still, I felt uneasy and decided to head back to camp. The fog had lifted a little, but the woods felt colder, the shadows longer. When I got back to the clearing, everything looked the same, but something was off. My fire pit was disturbed, the ashes scattered, some sticks broken. I hadn't left the fire burning. I was sure I'd put it out completely. I checked around but saw no sign of anyone. Still, the feeling of being watched crept over me. I decided to get inside my tent quickly and stay there until dawn. I lay on my sleeping bag, flashlight at hand, listening carefully. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate crunching sound, like someone stepping carefully through the underbrush, moving around the perimeter of my camp. I froze, heart pounding in my ears. The noises circled the tent, stopping at times. I was sure someone was out there, watching, maybe waiting. I thought about yelling or making noise, but I was scared that might provoke whoever it was. Instead, I held my breath and stayed as still as possible. The sounds finally faded away into the night, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. I didn't sleep much that night, my eyes snapping open at every small noise. The next morning, I decided to pack up immediately and leave. But when I stepped out of the tent, I saw something that stopped me cold. Near the fire pit was a small pile of broken branches arranged in a crude triangle shape. It looked deliberate, like a sign or a message. My stomach turned. I scanned the trees around me and saw fresh markings on the bark. Deep scratches and patterns that looked like symbols, but made no sense to me. Whoever was here had been close and had been watching, marking territory perhaps. I didn't want to wait to find out what it meant. I packed quickly, the unease growing heavier with every passing minute. As I tore down my tent, I kept glancing into the woods, expecting to see a figure or movement. I took the same trail back to my car, but this time, I was hyper-aware of every sound and shadow. The footprints I had seen the day before were now everywhere, sometimes leading ahead, sometimes crossing my path. It was like whoever was out there was following me or leading me. At one point, I heard a low growl behind me. I spun around, but saw only trees. I started running, heart pounding, branches whipping my face. I kept running until I reached a small clearing where my car was parked. I didn't even pause to breathe before jumping in, locking the doors and starting the engine. As I drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the trees. Back in town, I told myself it had been some kind of hunter or camper playing games or just marking their land. But the way they moved silently, the signs, and those strange symbols made me wonder if it was something else. Someone or a group wanting to keep others out. The experience left a mark on me. I stopped camping alone after that, and I always checked for signs of other people or strange marks whenever I was in the woods. It was a simple trip that turned into a reminder that sometimes, the scariest things don't come from myths or ghosts. They come from real people and the unknown threats hiding quietly in the shadows. In the end, I learned to respect the wild and be cautious. It wasn't just the nature around me I had to watch. It was the other humans who might be out there, watching me, marking their territory in ways I didn't understand. That trip changed how I see the woods forever. I set out for the camping trip in the late summer of 2013. I was 28 at the time and had been looking forward to a weekend alone in the wilderness for months. The plan was simple: drive out to a remote part of the Cascade Mountains in Washington state, find a quiet spot near a small lake, set up my tent, fish, read, and just get away from everything. No phone, no internet, no distractions. Just me and the woods. The drive took about 4 hours from Seattle, and by the time I reached the dirt road leading into the forest, the sun was already starting to dip low behind the trees. The air was cool, carrying the smell of pine and wet earth. I parked the car, grabbed my pack, and started hiking down the trail toward the lake. The path was narrow and overgrown in places, but nothing too rough. I could hear birds chirping, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, and the occasional snap of twigs beneath my boots. After about an hour, I arrived at the clearing where I planned to camp. The lake was smaller than I expected, but clear and still, reflecting the deep blue of the sky. Around the edge, tall fir trees stood like silent sentinels. I chose a spot near the water, where the ground was flat and dry, and began setting up my tent. The familiar routine of staking corners, pulling the rainfly tight, and arranging my sleeping bag gave me a calm focus. By the time my camp was fully set up, the sun had completely disappeared, and twilight had settled. I built a small fire in the fire ring I found near the campsite. The warmth and flickering light brought comfort as I unpacked my dinner: canned beans and bread, and ate slowly, listening to the sounds of the night. As darkness deepened, the forest came alive with different noises. Crickets chirped in rhythm, owls hooted from somewhere far away, and a gentle breeze whispered through the needles above. I was alone, but it felt peaceful, natural, even safe. Then, after I finished eating and was about to crawl into my sleeping bag, I noticed a faint sound that didn't fit with the usual night chorus. A soft, rhythmic crunching. It was the sound of footsteps, but not close enough to be right at my tent. It was slow and steady, walking along the edge of the clearing, near the trees. At first, I thought it might be a deer or some other animal. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was probably just a raccoon or a small bear wandering nearby. I wasn't worried. I had a small can of bear spray and a flashlight. Still, the sound didn't stop. It circled the clearing once, then twice, and I could now hear something more. A low, heavy breathing that wasn't animal-like, more human. I stayed very still, watching the dark line of trees beyond the firelight. Then I saw it. A figure moving slowly between the trunks, tall and thin, keeping to the shadows. It didn't make any sudden moves, but it was clearly watching me. My heart started pounding hard, every muscle tense. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on, shining the beam toward where I saw the movement. The figure vanished instantly into the darkness beyond the trees, but the footsteps continued for a moment before stopping entirely. I didn't move or make a sound. I didn't want to show that I noticed it. The fire was small but alive, and I decided to wait it out before trying to sleep. After about 15 minutes, the footsteps disappeared altogether, leaving only the natural sounds again. I tried to convince myself it was someone else camping nearby or maybe a hunter passing through, but something didn't feel right. I hadn't heard any voices or other signs of people. No rustling of a tent or campfire smoke. Just those footsteps circling around. I didn't sleep well that night. Every small noise made me jump. I kept my flashlight by my side and my bear spray close at hand. At one point, I thought I heard the footsteps again, but it was probably my mind playing tricks. In the morning, the sun came up slowly, painting the forest with soft gold light. I packed up camp quickly, eager to get back to my car and leave. On the way back, I stopped at a ranger station to ask if anyone reported suspicious activity in the area. The ranger looked concerned when I described the footsteps and the figure. He told me there had been a few reports over the last several months about someone stalking campers and hikers, but no one had caught the person or reported them directly. They believed it was a man living rough in the forest, maybe homeless or running from the law, who stayed hidden and sometimes watched people from a distance. The ranger advised me to stick to popular trails and campgrounds from now on, where there were more people and less chance of encountering someone like that. Looking back, I realized how close I came to something dangerous that night. The figure could have been anything, a person who meant no harm or someone with bad intentions. I never found out who it was or what they wanted, but the experience left me shaken. After that trip, I never went camping alone in remote places again. The peaceful solitude I once craved now felt like a risk I wasn't willing to take. The woods had shown me that some dangers don't come from animals or the weather, but from the unknown presence of another human, watching silently just out of sight. And that knowledge changed everything about how I saw the wild. I set out for a weekend camping trip in the summer of 2013. The place was a remote area in the Pacific Northwest, not far from Mount Rainier but deep enough in the forest that cell service vanished the moment I turned off the highway. I was 28, an experienced camper but never completely alone like this. I chose a spot along the edge of a small creek where the trees opened up just enough for my tent. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, the kind of place that feels untouched, where no one really comes through except the occasional hiker. I arrived late afternoon, the sun filtering low through the trees, casting long shadows. The ground was uneven, littered with fallen branches and old leaves. I unpacked my gear slowly, setting up the tent with care. I always took the time because the last thing I wanted was to deal with a collapsed shelter in the middle of the night. Once the tent was secure, I gathered some dry wood from the surrounding area. It was tricky because the forest floor was moist, but I found some brittle twigs and pine cones to start a fire. The crackle of flames soon broke the forest silence, and I sat close, warming my hands, feeling the cool air settle in as the sun dipped lower. The night was calm at first. Crickets chirped, and somewhere distant, a woodpecker tapped rhythmically on a tree trunk. I had brought enough food for 2 days: canned beans, a few energy bars, and a small packet of instant coffee. I ate slowly, watching the fire flicker. The forest felt peaceful, almost like it was holding its breath. But then, as the fire died down to glowing embers, I heard something else. A faint rustling beyond the clearing, deeper into the trees. At first, I told myself it was just a deer or a raccoon. I wasn't worried. Wildlife was normal out here. The sound came in uneven bursts, like footsteps moving through dry leaves. Not close enough to be dangerous, but close enough to make me alert. I checked my knife, which was lying next to my backpack. It was a standard camping blade, nothing fancy but sharp enough. The rustling paused and then resumed, slower this time, deliberate almost. I didn't have a flashlight turned on. I wanted to keep my night vision intact. But the forest around my fire was now a wall of darkness, thick and black. The sky above was partly cloudy, and the moon hid behind clouds, giving me only the dim glow of the firelight. Minutes passed, but the sounds never fully disappeared. They circled the clearing, as if something was moving just beyond sight. I stayed still, every muscle tense. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I knew that out here any animal, especially a bear or a cougar, could be dangerous, but the footsteps didn't sound heavy enough for either of those. Too light for a bear, too irregular for a cougar. And then the rustling stopped suddenly, like whoever or whatever it was had vanished. I decided to stay awake the rest of the night. The temperature dropped fast, and I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, keeping the knife close and the fire smoldering. I tried to keep calm, telling myself that the forest was full of sounds and that I was safe. But sleep was impossible. Every little noise made me jolt. The creek's gentle babbling was now a strange constant in the background, almost eerie in the quiet. Around 3 a.m., I heard something new, the faintest sound of snapping branches, not the random kind but careful, slow, like someone trying not to make noise. I froze. The sound was coming from the side of the creek, just across from where I had set up camp. It was the kind of sound I had never heard in the wild before, the kind that made every survival instinct in me scream alert. I reached for my flashlight and flicked it on, sweeping the beam slowly over the dark trees. For a moment, nothing. Then the beam caught movement. A shadow slipped between 2 trees about 40 feet away. Not an animal. It was too tall, and its shape was wrong for anything wild. The figure was hunched, wearing dark clothes that blended perfectly with the night. I swallowed hard, my body freezing. I didn't want to panic, but every nerve was screaming danger. I didn't make a sound, and the figure disappeared into the shadows as quickly as it had come. I kept the flashlight trained on the spot, but the forest swallowed everything. My mind raced through possibilities. Could it be a hunter or someone hiding? My gut said the latter because hunters usually made noise or wore some reflective gear. This was someone who didn't want to be found. I decided not to pack up or leave right away. The thought of stepping into the dark woods to chase whoever it was stupid. Instead, I waited until the first pale light of dawn began to break. The night stretched endlessly, with me clutching my knife and sitting by the dying fire, eyes scanning the edge of the trees constantly. When the sun finally began to rise, the forest seemed less threatening, almost calm again. I packed up quickly but carefully, not making any loud noises. I didn't want to attract attention or leave behind clues. My heart was still racing, but I forced myself to move methodically, taking down the tent and stuffing everything into my backpack. I left the camp and moved toward the trail I had used to come in. On the way, I noticed some footprints in the soft earth near the creek, small, boot-like, but worn. They were fresh, probably from the night before. They matched the direction of where the figure had disappeared. Whoever it was had stayed close. I didn't look back. I walked fast but steady, trying to keep my eyes on the trail and away from the dense trees. After an hour, I reached the edge of the forest and saw a car parked along the highway, its engine running. Relief hit me hard. I got in, locked the doors, and drove away without hesitation. That night in the forest left something behind. The fear wasn't about ghosts or monsters. It was about real people. People who could be watching, hiding, waiting. The wilderness was not just nature. It had a darker side, the one you don't see until you're alone and realize that sometimes the scariest thing out there is another human being. Since then, I never camp alone in that area again. And I never leave without telling someone exactly where I'm going. The memory of those footsteps, the shadow that moved in the dark, reminds me that survival is not just about skill or gear. It's about respect for the unknown and always expecting that the forest hides more than just trees. I set out for a weekend camping trip in the summer of 2013. The place was a remote area in the Pacific Northwest, not far from Mount Rainier but deep enough in the forest that cell service vanished the moment I turned off the highway. I was 28, an experienced camper but never completely alone like this. I chose a spot along the edge of a small creek where the trees opened up just enough for my tent. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, the kind of place that feels untouched, where no one really comes through except the occasional hiker. I arrived late afternoon, the sun filtering low through the trees, casting long shadows. The ground was uneven, littered with fallen branches and old leaves. I unpacked my gear slowly, setting up the tent with care. I always took the time because the last thing I wanted was to deal with a collapsed shelter in the middle of the night. Once the tent was secure, I gathered some dry wood from the surrounding area. It was tricky because the forest floor was moist, but I found some brittle twigs and pine cones to start a fire. The crackle of flames soon broke the forest silence, and I sat close, warming my hands, feeling the cool air settle in as the sun dipped lower. The night was calm at first. Crickets chirped, and somewhere distant, a woodpecker tapped rhythmically on a tree trunk. I had brought enough food for 2 days, canned beans, a few energy bars, and a small packet of instant coffee. I ate slowly, watching the fire flicker. The forest felt peaceful, almost like it was holding its breath. But then, as the fire died down to glowing embers, I heard something else. A faint rustling beyond the clearing, deeper into the trees. At first, I told myself it was just a deer or a raccoon. I wasn't worried. Wildlife was normal out here. The sound came in uneven bursts, like footsteps moving through dry leaves. Not close enough to be dangerous, but close enough to make me alert. I checked my knife, which was lying next to my backpack. It was a standard camping blade, nothing fancy but sharp enough. The rustling paused and then resumed, slower this time, deliberate almost. I didn't have a flashlight turned on. I wanted to keep my night vision intact. But the forest around my fire was now a wall of darkness, thick and black. The sky above was partly cloudy, and the moon hid behind clouds, giving me only the dim glow of the firelight. Minutes passed, but the sounds never fully disappeared. They circled the clearing, as if something was moving just beyond sight. I stayed still, every muscle tense. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I knew that out here any animal, especially a bear or a cougar, could be dangerous, but the footsteps didn't sound heavy enough for either of those. Too light for a bear, too irregular for a cougar. And then the rustling stopped suddenly, like whoever or whatever it was had vanished. I decided to stay awake the rest of the night. The temperature dropped fast, and I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, keeping the knife close and the fire smoldering. I tried to keep calm, telling myself that the forest was full of sounds and that I was safe. But sleep was impossible. Every little noise made me jolt. The creek's gentle babbling was now a strange constant in the background, almost eerie in the quiet. Around 3 a.m., I heard something new, the faintest sound of snapping branches, not the random kind but careful, slow, like someone trying not to make noise. I froze. The sound was coming from the side of the creek, just across from where I had set up camp. It was the kind of sound I had never heard in the wild before, the kind that made every survival instinct in me scream alert. I reached for my flashlight and flicked it on, sweeping the beam slowly over the dark trees. For a moment, nothing. Then the beam caught movement. A shadow slipped between two trees about 40 feet away. Not an animal. It was too tall, and its shape was wrong for anything wild. The figure was hunched, wearing dark clothes that blended perfectly with the night. I swallowed hard, my body freezing. I didn't want to panic, but every nerve was screaming danger. I didn't make a sound, and the figure disappeared into the shadows as quickly as it had come. I kept the flashlight trained on the spot, but the forest swallowed everything. My mind raced through possibilities. Could it be a hunter or someone hiding? My gut said the latter because hunters usually made noise or wore some reflective gear. This was someone who didn't want to be found. I decided not to pack up or leave right away. The thought of stepping into the dark woods to chase whoever it was stupid. Instead, I waited until the first pale light of dawn began to break. The night stretched endlessly, with me clutching my knife and sitting by the dying fire, eyes scanning the edge of the trees constantly. When the sun finally began to rise, the forest seemed less threatening, almost calm again. I packed up quickly but carefully, not making any loud noises. I didn't want to attract attention or leave behind clues. My heart was still racing, but I forced myself to move methodically, taking down the tent and stuffing everything into my backpack. I left the camp and moved toward the trail I had used to come in. On the way, I noticed some footprints in the soft earth near the creek, small, boot-like, but worn. They were fresh, probably from the night before. They matched the direction of where the figure had disappeared. Whoever it was had stayed close. I didn't look back. I walked fast but steady, trying to keep my eyes on the trail and away from the dense trees. After an hour, I reached the edge of the forest and saw a car parked along the highway, its engine running. Relief hit me hard. I got in, locked the doors, and drove away without hesitation. That night in the forest left something behind. The fear wasn't about ghosts or monsters. It was about real people. People who could be watching, hiding, waiting. The wilderness was not just nature. It had a darker side, the one you don't see until you're alone and realize that sometimes the scariest thing out there is another human being. Since then, I never camp alone in that area again. And I never leave without telling someone exactly where I'm going. The memory of those footsteps, the shadow that moved in the dark, reminds me that survival is not just about skill or gear. It's about respect for the unknown and always expecting that the forest hides more than just trees. I decided to go camping alone in the summer of 2018. I was 26 then, working a stressful office job in Minneapolis, and the constant noise and pressure made me desperate for some time in the wilderness. I found a spot about 2 hours north, a small state park with dense woods, a lake, and barely any visitors during the week. The plan was simple. One night, some fresh air and silence. I packed my gear carefully, a basic tent, sleeping bag, enough food for 2 days, a small stove, a flashlight, extra batteries, and my pocket knife. I didn't tell many people where I was going, just in case. The phone signal was weak there, and I wanted to disconnect entirely. When I arrived, the sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows between the pine trees. The air smelled fresh, a mix of pine, earth, and something damp from the lake nearby. I picked a spot on a small clearing near the water, far enough from the main campground to avoid other campers, but close enough to reach the trailhead the next day. Setting up the tent took longer than I expected. My hands were shaking a little from nerves and excitement. The forest was quiet, except for the occasional bird call and the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Once my tent was set, I made a small fire in the fire ring left by the park rangers. I cooked some dehydrated pasta and ate slowly, watching the flames flicker. The sun finally disappeared, and the dark settled in quickly. The sky turned deep blue with stars twinkling far clearer than in the city. I felt peaceful and free, but also a little exposed. The woods felt vast, and I was alone in the middle of it. After eating, I cleaned up and put out the fire carefully, then crawled into my sleeping bag inside the tent. I had brought a book but didn't open it. The silence was almost too loud. Every small noise sounded strange. A branch snapping here, a bird calling there. At one point, I thought I heard something moving outside. I stayed very still, listening. The sounds stopped. Maybe it was just an animal. I checked my watch. It was only around 9 p.m. Too early to sleep, but too dark to explore. I tried to calm myself down and started thinking about tomorrow's hike. Suddenly, the sound came again. A faint rustling, like someone or something moving just outside my tent. I held my breath and grabbed my flashlight, ready to flash it through the tent's mesh window. But when I shone the light out, there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But the noise didn't stop. It got louder and closer, as if something was circling around my tent. I grabbed my knife and unzipped the tent slightly to peek out. The beam of my flashlight swept over the trees, the ground, the bushes. No eyes reflected back, no shape moved. But then, something caught my eye. Footprints, fresh and large, pressed in the dirt right outside the tent flap. My heart jumped. These were definitely human prints, and they weren't small. I hadn't seen another person all day. The prints circled around the clearing, coming close to my tent, then moving away, but staying close enough that I could hear the rustling. I tried to remember if anyone was around when I arrived, but the campground was empty. I sat back, frozen. The noise continued for a long time, circling, never getting too close but never leaving either. I kept my flashlight ready, my knife in my hand, but didn't dare step outside. After what felt like hours, the rustling finally stopped. The forest went completely quiet again. I lay awake, listening carefully until I finally fell into an uneasy sleep. When I woke, the first light of dawn was breaking through the trees. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, eyes scanning the area. The footprints were still there, clear in the soft dirt. They led deeper into the woods but didn't come back. I packed up quickly, heart still pounding. I decided not to hike the planned trail. Instead, I stuck to the main path back to the parking lot, moving fast. As I walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The woods felt different in the light, less threatening but still watchful. I thought about what I'd heard the night before, the footsteps, the circling. Who could it have been? A hunter? A lost camper? Someone with bad intentions? When I finally reached my car, relief washed over me. I locked the doors and started the engine, eager to leave. But just before I pulled out of the lot, I noticed something on the windshield. A small, folded piece of paper tucked under the wiper blade. Hands shaking, I opened it. The note was simple, written in block letters. "I saw you." I looked around quickly. No one was there. My heart raced as I locked the doors again. I didn't wait another second. I drove away as fast as I could. Back in the city, I told a friend about the note. They said it might be a prank, but it didn't feel like one. Something about those footsteps circling my tent and that note made it real and personal. After that trip, I never went camping alone again. I always told someone exactly where I was going and made sure to check my surroundings carefully. The woods are beautiful, but they can hide people who watch and follow without making a sound. The silence you seek can sometimes be broken by more than just animals. That experience taught me to respect the wild, but also to be wary of the dangers that come from other humans. Not every scary story needs ghosts or monsters. Sometimes, the real fear is knowing you're not as alone as you think, and that someone is watching you, waiting for the right moment. It was the summer of 2018 when I decided to go camping alone for the first time. I wasn't some expert or anything. I was just 25, working a dead-end office job, desperate to get away from the city's noise, people, and endless traffic. The idea was simple. Drive out to a remote state park in northern Michigan, set up my tent near the lake, and spend 3 days hiking, fishing, and just being away from everything. I packed light but made sure to bring enough food, water, a decent knife, a small first aid kit, and a flashlight with extra batteries. I had no plans for a fancy setup. I just wanted to escape. The drive was long, but peaceful. As I pulled into the park's entrance just before sunset, the smell of pine and damp earth hit me like a wave of calm. The ranger gave me a quick nod as he handed over the permit, warning me to stay on marked trails and to keep an eye out for bears. That last part made me nervous, but I told myself I'd be careful. I found a spot to set up my tent near the edge of the lake. The ground was soft but dry enough to pitch the tent properly. I noticed a few campsites around, but none were too close, just the kind of distance I wanted for some solitude. The lake was quiet, with water so clear I could see small fish swimming near the shore. I took my time setting up, making sure the tent stakes were firm. When night fell, I lit a small campfire and sat close to it, roasting some canned beans on a makeshift skewer. The first night passed uneventfully. The sounds of the forest surrounded me. Crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. I fell asleep easily, wrapped in my sleeping bag, comforted by the crackling fire dying down to embers. The next morning, I woke early, the sky barely showing hints of dawn. I brewed some instant coffee on a small portable stove and ate a granola bar. I planned a hike for the day, so I packed light again: water, a map, my knife, and a small first aid kit. The trail led me through thick woods, full of towering pines and birch trees, moss-covered rocks, and patches of wildflowers. The air was fresh, and for a few hours, I felt completely free. By midday, I found a small clearing with a beautiful view of the lake from above. I stopped to eat some trail mix and took pictures with my phone. It felt like the perfect day, one I dreamt about for months. But on the way back to camp, something shifted. At first, it was just a feeling. Something was off. The forest grew quieter. The usual birdsong was absent. The wind seemed to stop entirely. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just the late afternoon lull. Then I noticed the trail markers, those little colored ribbons tied to tree branches to guide hikers, were missing. I knew I hadn't passed that point earlier on the hike. I stopped and looked around carefully. Nothing seemed familiar anymore. The trees looked denser, the light dimmer. Panic crept in slowly. I took out my map, tried to get my bearings, but the dense forest made it hard to see the sun through the canopy. The path I thought I was on seemed to have disappeared entirely. I tried to retrace my steps, but the forest was full of similar-looking trees and thick underbrush. After walking for what felt like an hour, my legs tired and my mind raced. I had no signal on my phone. No GPS, no calls, no way to get help. I finally stopped near a fallen log, breathing hard and trying to stay calm. I reminded myself that panic would only make things worse. I sat down, drank some water, and tried to think. The sun was setting faster now. Shadows grew long and the temperature dropped. I knew I had to find shelter and light. I pulled out my flashlight, which thankfully still had some battery left, and started walking in what I hoped was the direction of the lake. As darkness closed in, the forest seemed to change again. Every sound became louder and sharper: the crunch of twigs underfoot, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of animals. At one point, I heard heavy breathing that wasn't mine. I froze, shining my light into the trees, but saw nothing. I kept moving, heart pounding, trying to stay on what looked like a faint path. After what felt like hours, I finally saw a faint glimmer of water through the trees. Relief flooded me. I rushed toward it and found myself at the lake's edge, right near my campsite. But something was wrong. The campfire was still smoldering, but my tent was torn. It looked like something had tried to get inside. My backpack was missing. I searched around frantically, feeling a cold sweat break on my forehead. Then I heard it, a low growl coming from the woods behind the camp. I grabbed my knife tightly. The growling grew louder and closer. I saw movement, large shapes stepping out from the shadows. It wasn't ghosts or anything supernatural. It was bears. A small family of them had wandered into my sight, probably attracted by the smell of my food. I backed away slowly toward the lake, keeping my eyes on them. The bears didn't charge, but they were watching me carefully. I knew running would trigger a chase. I remembered the ranger's advice: stay calm, don't turn your back, and try to make yourself look big. I found a large fallen tree and climbed onto it. The bears circled below, sniffing the air and occasionally growling softly. My flashlight flickered once, then died. I was trapped with no way to scare them off. I stayed on the log, shivering in the cold night air, as the bears finally lost interest and wandered back into the forest after a long time. When dawn came, I cautiously packed up what I could salvage. My food was gone, my backpack was missing, but my tent still stood, though damaged. I didn't waste a second. I used my phone to call the park ranger and explained my situation as soon as I got signal. He told me to stay put and wait for help. After a tense hour, he arrived with a truck and some other campers. I was safe but shaken to my core. The bears had probably raided my camp while I was gone on the hike, and I had gotten lost trying to find my way back in the dark. That trip taught me a lot about nature and respect for wildlife. I wasn't just out there for fun. I was a guest in a wild place where animals were real, dangerous, and unpredictable. I never camped alone again, but I also never stopped loving the forest. I just learned to prepare better, respect the rules, and never underestimate how quickly things can change out there. The memory of that night, lost in the woods, scared and alone, with wild bears nearby, is something I'll never forget. It was real, raw, and terrifying in the most honest way possible. I never thought a simple camping trip could turn into one of the most frightening experiences of my life. It was the summer of 2016, and I was 26 years old. I had been planning this solo trip for months, a chance to get away from the noise and chaos of the city, to find some peace deep in the wilderness of northern Minnesota. I found a quiet spot in the Superior National Forest, near the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. The area was known for its dense woods, endless lakes, and isolation, and that was exactly what I wanted. I packed my gear carefully: a small tent, a sleeping bag, some food, a water filter, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and a pocket knife. I was confident I was ready for anything. The drive out there was long, but the road ended at a parking area where I started my hike. The trail I chose was marked but not heavily traveled. The weather was clear, the sun warm on my back as I walked through thick stands of pine and birch. The forest was alive with sounds: birds singing, leaves rustling, insects buzzing. It was peaceful in a way only the wild can be, but there was also a weight to the silence that grew heavier as I moved deeper into the woods. After about 3 hours of hiking, I found a small clearing beside a lake. The water was still, reflecting the sky like glass. It was the perfect spot to set up camp. I worked quickly to pitch my tent near the water's edge. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky orange and pink. I gathered some dry wood and built a small fire, careful to keep it contained. The warmth was comforting, and I sat for a while, staring into the flames, feeling small under the vast sky. As night fell, the forest grew darker and quieter. The sounds I'd heard during the day faded, replaced by the occasional snap of a twig or the distant call of an owl. I lay inside my tent, the thin walls doing little to block the cool night air or the sounds outside. My flashlight was charged, and I had my knife close by. Still, a creeping unease settled in my chest. Something felt off. Around midnight, I was woken by a sharp noise outside. A heavy thud, like something large hitting the ground. My heart jumped. I lay still, listening. Another thud. Then the unmistakable crunch of footsteps moving slowly around my tent. My mind raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. I remembered the warnings about bears in this area. I'd taken all the proper precautions, like hanging my food from a tree far away, but the sound was too heavy and deliberate. It didn't sound like an animal scavenging. It sounded like something watching me. I reached for my flashlight and knife, but as I shifted, the footsteps stopped. Silence fell again. I didn't dare move or make a sound, hoping whatever was out there would leave. Minutes passed like hours. Eventually, the noises stopped altogether. I tried to sleep but couldn't. The fear settled deep, mixing with the cold night air. At dawn, I peeked outside cautiously. The fire was still smoldering, but there were fresh footprints in the soft dirt around my tent. Large, uneven, like heavy boots, but not quite human. I traced the prints with my eyes as they disappeared into the trees. I packed up quickly, keeping my senses sharp. On my way out, I stuck to the trail, moving faster than before. The forest felt different now, tense and watchful. Every crack of a branch made me flinch. When I finally reached the parking lot hours later, I was relieved to see my car untouched. Driving away, I thought about what had happened. No one else had been around. No animals usually make noises like that. The footprints looked too large and strange to be human boots. I told myself it must have been some hunter or woodsman who stumbled near my camp. But it wasn't a comforting thought. Hunters don't usually circle a campsite at night, and the heavy, slow footsteps didn't fit. I reported the strange footprints to the ranger station. They told me there had been some reports of poachers in the area, people illegally hunting or trapping animals. Some were known to carry heavy boots and move carefully to avoid detection. The rangers said it was possible one had been near my site, watching from the shadows. Looking back, I realized how close I'd come to a real danger. It wasn't some supernatural force, just a person with bad intentions, lurking in the dark woods, silent but heavy on the earth, watching. I never went back to that forest, and I never camped alone again. The memory of those footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, stayed with me for years. It was a raw reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't monsters or ghosts. They're the people who hide in the dark, where no one can see them. That night changed how I thought about wilderness. It's not just peaceful nature. It can be unpredictable and dangerous in very human ways. I learned to respect that and to never underestimate the shadows between the trees. It was the summer of 2019 when I decided to go camping alone in the dense forests of northern Vermont. I was 26, eager to get away from the noise of the city and the constant buzz of everyday life. I had some experience camping, nothing extreme, just a few weekend trips with friends, but this time I wanted to test myself, to be fully on my own deep in the woods. I picked a remote spot near a little-known trail I had read about in an old hiking guide. The place was supposed to be quiet, untouched, perfect for a weekend of solitude. I arrived late afternoon, carrying a heavy backpack with all my gear. A tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small stove, a flashlight, and a pocket knife. The forest was thick, with tall pine trees standing like silent sentinels all around. The air was cool and smelled of earth and pine needles, a clean scent that felt calming. I found a small clearing by a shallow creek, with enough space to pitch my tent and start a fire. The ground was soft, covered with moss and fallen leaves. Setting up the tent took longer than I expected. My hands were clumsy with the unfamiliar stakes and poles, and the fading light made it harder to see. By the time I finished, the sun was just dipping behind the hills, casting long shadows that stretched through the trees like dark fingers. I gathered some dry wood for a fire, carefully building a small pile in a fire ring made of stones. Once the fire was lit, the warmth and flickering light felt like a small island of safety in the growing darkness. I cooked a simple dinner, instant noodles, and ate while sitting on a log near the fire. The forest was quiet except for the occasional rustling of small animals and the gentle flow of the creek. I was tired but content, ready to crawl into my sleeping bag once the fire died down. Around 10 p.m., I crawled into my tent, zipped it shut, and switched on my flashlight to read a few pages of a book. The thin fabric of the tent let in some of the night sounds, an owl hooting far away, the occasional snap of a twig, the whisper of wind moving through the trees. I didn't feel scared, just peaceful. I put out the flashlight and settled in to sleep. But that's when things started to get strange. About an hour later, I woke up suddenly. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then I heard it again. A soft crunching noise outside the tent, like footsteps moving slowly on dry leaves. I froze, trying to listen carefully. The forest was supposed to be quiet at night, especially this deep inside, far from any trail. My heart began to beat faster. I stayed perfectly still, holding my breath. The steps moved closer, but they were careful, deliberate, as if someone was trying not to be heard but wasn't very skilled at it. I didn't dare open the tent or make a sound. My mind raced through possibilities, maybe a deer, but the steps were too heavy, too measured. Then, without warning, the crunching stopped right outside my tent. Complete silence. The kind of silence that feels loud. I lay there, eyes wide in the dark, waiting for something to happen. The stillness lasted minutes, maybe longer. Then I heard another noise. A low scrape, like something dragging lightly against the tent's outer fabric. My skin prickled. I could feel the presence just beyond the thin nylon wall. I wanted to move, to grab my flashlight, but fear kept me frozen. My fingers trembled as I slowly reached for my knife, which was in the side pocket of my backpack. The fabric of the tent pressed against my face as I stayed low, watching. Suddenly, a faint crackling came from the fire pit. I had left the fire to die down, but a few embers still glowed red, sending weak orange light through the trees. I realized whoever or whatever was there was watching me too. The scrape stopped, replaced by a low, slow breathing sound, almost human but rough and uneven. Then something sharp struck the tent wall, hard enough to make me jump. I pressed my body flat to the ground, clutching my knife. The thing outside hit the tent again, more aggressively this time, almost like it was testing the fabric. I could smell something, smoke from the dying fire mixed with a strong, musky odor. Not like an animal, more like a person who had been living rough in the woods for days. Panic surged, but I forced myself to stay quiet. The presence stayed for maybe 10 minutes, hitting the tent softly, breathing heavily, then retreating slowly. I heard footsteps fade away into the dark forest. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed alive. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I unzipped the tent and stepped out cautiously. The fire was completely out, ashes cold. Around the tent, the ground was disturbed. Small footprints, too big and rough for any animal I knew. They led away into the forest but didn't follow any obvious trail. I followed the prints for a few yards but lost them where the moss grew thick. The rest of the morning was tense. I packed my things quickly but carefully, constantly scanning the woods. Something wasn't right and I didn't want to stick around. As I hiked out, I found more signs. A crude shelter made of branches hidden near the creek. Some torn fabric caught on a bush. Broken twigs arranged in a rough pattern on the ground. It looked like someone had been watching me, maybe living nearby for a while and wasn't friendly. I made it back to my car without any more encounters, but the feeling stayed with me long after I left the forest. I reported what I found to the local ranger station, describing the footprints and signs of a possible person living illegally in the woods. Later, I learned that the area had been used by a homeless man who avoided contact with anyone and sometimes reacted aggressively when disturbed. He was eventually found and helped by authorities, but for those hours alone in the forest, I had no way of knowing what I was facing. The experience changed how I looked at camping alone. It wasn't the quiet beauty or the peace that scared me. It was the unknown people, the hidden lives living just out of sight, and how easily things could go wrong when you're completely alone and vulnerable. I still go camping sometimes, but never that deep into unknown woods without telling someone exactly where I'll be. And I always carry my phone fully charged, just in case. Being alone in the forest feels safe until it doesn't. That night, the fear wasn't about monsters or ghosts. It was about a real person, someone desperate, watching me, close enough to touch but still hidden in the dark. That's the kind of fear that stays with you long after the forest is behind you. I went camping alone in late October of 2023, a few hours outside a quiet mountain town in northern Colorado. I was 29 at the time, and I had spent most of that year working long hours indoors, barely seeing daylight, so I felt this strange pressure inside me to go somewhere quiet and empty. I picked a place deep inside the Roosevelt National Forest, far from campsites, far from trails, far from anyone who might wander by. I wanted to hear nothing but wind and leaves and maybe some water flowing far away. I wanted to feel small again, like something in the world could push me around if it wanted. I didn't know that feeling would turn into something else. I reached the area in the late afternoon. The sun was already soft, touching the tops of the pine trees with a warm orange glow. The air felt cold enough to bite at my fingertips, but still clean and sharp. I parked my old SUV at the end of a narrow dirt road that looked like no one had used it in months. Dry branches cracked under the tires. The forest around me looked tired and almost colorless except for the yellow leaves still hanging on stubborn aspens. Everything looked peaceful in that half-dead way that late fall usually brings. I grabbed my backpack, tent, water, and a small hatchet. I walked deeper into the woods, following no real path, just stepping over fallen logs and pushing through tall grass that had turned brown and brittle. I wanted to be alone deeper inside, where even the sound of the road would disappear. After walking for maybe 40 minutes, I found a small open space between tall pines. The ground was soft with layers of needles, and a small slope on the east side blocked the wind. I set up my tent there, stretching the fabric tight, placing rocks on top of the stakes for extra hold. The temperature dropped fast as the sun went down behind the ridge. Everything felt normal then, calm. I boiled some water, made a simple meal, and sat with my back against a tree while the sky darkened. I could hear small sounds of animals far away, maybe deer stepping through brush, maybe squirrels jumping between branches. Nothing strange, nothing that felt off. Just the usual sounds of a place that doesn't care about you. When night fully settled in, the forest went heavy and quiet. The cold sank deeper into the ground, and my breath came out like short white clouds. I crawled into my tent and wrapped myself in my sleeping bag. I kept a small flashlight next to me, ready if I needed to check anything. The darkness outside felt thick, like it had weight to it. But I wasn't scared. Not yet. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. I couldn't tell why at first. There was no dream, no sudden movement, nothing like that. I just opened my eyes all at once. The air inside my tent felt colder than before, as if something had stirred it. I lay still, listening. At first all I heard was my heartbeat, fast and uneven from waking too quickly. Then I heard it. A weak, soft snapping sound somewhere outside, like someone stepping on thin twigs. The steps were slow, spaced apart. One, then a long pause, then another. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe an elk. They moved like that sometimes, but this felt different. It wasn't the heavy shifting sound large animals make. It wasn't the quick scattering noise small animals create. It was steady, slow, careful. I stayed still for a long time. The sound came again, closer now. My tent was thin enough that I could feel the vibration of each step through the ground. Something was moving near me, circling or maybe just passing through the area. I kept breathing quietly, trying not to make any noise. My hands felt cold even inside the sleeping bag. Then everything went silent again, completely silent, like the entire forest held its breath with me. My ears burned from listening too hard. Minutes passed. I don't know how many. Enough that my body started to relax, and I almost convinced myself that the sound had been in my head. But before I could drift off again, I heard something new. This time not a step, but a faint scraping against rough bark. Not tree branches moving in the wind. This was slow, deliberate, like something dragging against the trunk of a pine tree just outside my tent. I felt my whole body tighten. I didn't move. My mind started to race, imagining someone out there. Person. Someone who shouldn't be there. In a place where almost no one goes this deep at this time of year. In the middle of the night, with no light, no sound except that. I lay awake for at least an hour, maybe more. The scraping came and went. Sometimes small, sometimes a little sharper. I pictured a man pressing his back against a tree, slowly sliding downward. Or someone using the trunk to steady themselves while looking around. Every thought made the air inside my tent feel colder. Eventually, the sounds stopped again. This time, they didn't come back. But I couldn't sleep. I waited until the first thin light of dawn finally pushed into the sky. As soon as I saw the faint gray filter through the tent fabric, I unzipped it and stepped outside. The cold air hit me instantly, but I didn't care. I needed to see what had been out there. The ground around my tent looked normal at first. Pine needles, small sticks, patches of frozen dirt. But a few steps away, something caught my eye. The surface of the ground had multiple depressions, faint but present. Not boots, not hooves, bare footprints. Human, long, narrow, with toes visible in the dirt and frost. Some looked fresh, edges still sharp. Others looked stepped over, as if the same person had walked circles around the area. My stomach tightened when I saw that the prints went toward a tall pine tree about 15 feet away. The bark on one side had fresh scratches running downward. Long marks, uneven, as if someone had dragged their fingers or nails across it slowly. The marks were at shoulder height, then lower, almost to the ground. I stared at them for a long time, feeling the cold spread through my chest. I looked around the forest, scanning between the trees, expecting to see someone hiding or watching. But everything looked empty. Too empty. Whoever it was had been there for a while. Close enough to reach the tree near me. Close enough that they had walked around my tent slowly, maybe watching the fabric bulge with my breathing. Maybe waiting. I packed my things fast, checking over my shoulder every few seconds. My hands shook as I took down the tent. I kept feeling like someone was going to step out from behind a tree at any moment. There were no sounds, nothing moving, but the air around me felt wrong, like something heavy had passed through during the night and left a trace behind. When I finally started walking back toward my SUV, I kept my hatchet in my hand the entire time. I didn't care how paranoid it looked. The forest felt different now. Not peaceful, not wild, just empty in a way that didn't feel natural. As if something human had moved through it but didn't belong there. The walk back felt twice as long as the walk in. Every time I heard a twig snap or a branch shift, I froze and scanned the trees, expecting to see someone crouched low or standing still. But nothing came out. When I reached my SUV, I opened the door fast and threw my gear inside. Before getting in, I looked back one last time at the thin path I had taken into the woods. The trees stood tall and silent, almost watching, almost waiting. I drove away without looking into the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see anything behind me. Later that night, when I was back home, warm and safe, I searched online for anything about people living secretly in that part of the forest. Missing persons, strange sightings, anything. I found nothing useful, but I kept thinking about those bare footprints and the scratches on the tree. The way the steps circled around my tent. The slow pacing, the careful movements, the long pauses between each sound. In the end, the most realistic explanation was also the one that scared me the most. Someone was out there, far from any trail, far from any campsite, walking barefoot in freezing temperatures, watching a stranger sleep in the middle of the night. Someone close enough to touch the walls of my tent if they wanted to. Someone who didn't leave anything behind except footprints and scratches. I never went camping alone again after that. And every time I think about that night, the part that stays with me isn't the sound of the footsteps or the scraping on the tree. It's the moment I realized that the woods weren't the scary part. The scary part was knowing that another person had been out there with me, moving slowly in the dark, almost silent, almost patient, not saying a single word, and I still have no idea what they wanted. I went camping deep in the northern woods in late October of 2022, far from the small town where I lived. I was 27 then, and I picked a quiet valley that sat miles away from any marked trail. I wanted silence and space, something to clear my head after weeks of stress. I parked my old car on the side of a rough dirt road and walked the rest of the way with my pack pulling on my shoulders. The air was cool but dry, and the sky looked clean, with long strips of pale blue stretching across the afternoon light. I remember feeling good, almost proud of myself for choosing such a remote place. I thought the isolation would be peaceful. The woods were thick with tall pine trees that leaned in strange angles because of uneven ground. The forest floor was covered with soft brown needles that made every step quieter than it should have been. I found a flat spot near a small stream that looked like it had cut through the valley for years. The water moved slowly, making a steady sound that felt calming. I set up my tent there, unpacked my sleeping bag, and placed my food up on a tree branch a little away from the campsite. It felt like a perfect setup, the kind of simple scene you picture in your mind when you think about camping alone. As the sun started to drop, the temperature shifted faster than I expected. The air became colder, sharper, and the shadows between the trees grew deeper. I built a small fire using dry sticks I collected earlier, and for a while I just sat there watching the flames move. The heat on my face felt comforting. I ate a simple meal and listened to the woods. During the day, the forest had sounded like life: birds, wind, soft rustling. But at night it changed. The silence felt heavier, like the trees were holding their breath. When the fire had burned low, I crawled into my tent with my flashlight beside me. I tried to sleep, but every time I started drifting off, some faint noise outside would pull me back awake. At first it was small things, maybe a twig shifting under its own weight, or the stream making a tiny splash. But later, just past midnight, I heard something that didn't fit the normal sounds of the woods. It was a slow, steady movement through the pine needles, like someone dragging their foot or pulling something heavy along the ground. The rhythm of it made my stomach tighten because it wasn't random. It had a pattern, a clear pace, like steps taken with effort. I lay still, breathing slow, trying to convince myself it was just an animal. Probably a deer, maybe even a bear walking around. But the sound didn't match any animal I had ever heard. It didn't shuffle quickly like a deer, and it didn't sniff the air like bears usually do. It just dragged, paused, dragged again, coming closer by tiny inches. The thin tent wall felt useless. I didn't move. I didn't breathe hard. I just waited. The dragging stopped right outside my tent. Not near it, not around it, directly in front of where my feet were. I could hear the soft crunch of needles pushing down under weight. It stayed there for a long time. I felt every muscle in my body go tight. I stared at the dark inside of the tent, thinking about the knife I kept in my pack and realizing it wasn't even within reach. The cold air pressed through the thin fabric, and for a moment everything outside went completely silent. Not a breeze, not the stream, nothing. I didn't know if I was more afraid of the noise starting again or it staying quiet. After a minute, or maybe longer, I couldn't tell. I heard the dragging start again, but now it moved away from my camp, going deeper into the valley. It faded until it blended into the natural sounds of the woods. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling of my tent, freezing inside my sleeping bag and waiting for anything else to happen. My mind replayed the sound over and over, trying to explain it, trying to picture what could have made it, but every idea felt wrong. When the first pale light of morning touched the trees, I crawled out of the tent with stiff legs and numb fingers. The cold bit into my skin, but stepping out into daylight felt like being able to breathe again. I walked around the camp area slowly, looking at the ground. I didn't see footprints. I didn't see any clear tracks. But right where the sound had stopped the night before, the pine needles were pushed aside in a narrow line, as if something long and heavy had been dragged there. The line continued toward the deeper woods, where the ground sloped down and disappeared between thick bushes. I stood there staring at the marks, feeling a strange mix of confusion and fear. I knew that if I followed the marks, I might find the answer to what came so close to me. But being alone, miles from help, with no phone signal, I didn't want answers anymore. I just wanted to leave. I packed everything fast, barely stopping to fold my tent properly. My hands shook slightly, and the quiet morning around me felt nothing like peace. Felt like something watching from far away. The hike back to the car felt longer than when I came in. Every now and then I turned around, checking the trees behind me, listening for the dragging sound. But nothing followed. Nothing moved. When I reached the old dirt road and saw my car waiting the way I left it, I felt like I had crossed some invisible barrier back into safety. I climbed in, locked the doors even though it was broad daylight, and drove without looking back. For weeks after that trip, I kept thinking about those marks. The way they were spaced, the way they cut a straight path into the woods, the way the sound had come at night so slowly, so carefully. I don't know what came near my tent that night, and I don't think I ever will. But I know it wasn't wind, it wasn't trees settling, And it wasn't any animal I've ever heard in my life. It was something real, something physical, something moving with purpose. And the part that still stays with me is how close it got. Only thin tent fabric separating me from whatever dragged itself through the valley. That trip taught me something I never forgot. The woods don't need monsters or ghosts to scare you. The real things, things that live out there quietly, things that don't care if you understand them or not, are enough. I haven't camped alone since that night, and every time I hear pine needles crunch under my feet, I still remember how that sound felt in the dark, when I had nothing to protect me but silence. I went camping alone in the fall of 2019, in a quiet stretch of forest in northern Colorado, a place I had never tried before. I was 27 then, trying to get a break from work and noise, trying to feel the kind of silence you only get far away from towns. I picked a spot about 2 hours away from the nearest small highway, somewhere deep enough that I felt like I could breathe again, but not so deep that I couldn't walk out if something went wrong. That balance always made me feel safe, or at least safe enough to pretend. The air felt cold the whole drive up, the kind of cold that sticks to the windshield even when you keep the heater running. Most of the trees were losing their leaves already, so the forest had a mix of open spaces and thick sections that looked darker than they should have at that hour. The ground had that dry, broken sound when I stepped on it. I remember liking that sound. It made me feel like I was walking somewhere untouched. I found a flat patch of dirt beside a narrow creek that barely moved. The water looked almost black in the shade. I set up my tent and laid out my sleeping bag, then placed all my gear inside with the same routine I always had. Food bag sealed tight, backpack against the tent wall, pocket knife near my sleeping area, flashlight beside my head. I always placed everything in the same spots so that, even in the dark, I could reach for whatever I needed without fumbling. I spent the afternoon doing the usual boring camping tasks, collecting firewood, boiling water, checking the map again even though I already knew the area well enough. I tried to enjoy the silence, but something about that forest felt heavier than the places I usually camped. Maybe it was just the time of year, or the way the wind barely moved but still made the branches creak like something was pushing them from below. It got dark earlier than I expected. The sky didn't turn into that soft evening color. It just dropped straight into black. I made a small fire and sat close to it, warming my hands. Every sound around me seemed closer than normal. Even the creek, which barely made a noise earlier, sounded like it was bubbling under pressure. I tried not to think too much of it. I kept telling myself it was because I was alone, deeper in the woods than usual. Around 10 p.m., I put out the fire and went inside the tent. The cold settled quick. I could feel it creeping in from the ground, even with the sleeping pad underneath me. I tried to sleep on my side, then my back, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt like the darkness outside the thin tent walls pressed against me like a weight. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to pull me out of sleep fast. It sounded like something stepping on dry leaves just a few feet away from my tent. Slow, spaced out steps. Not the smooth sound of wind pushing things around. Not the random scatter of branches falling. Something heavier, something placing its weight down with purpose. I froze. My breath felt too loud inside the tent. I kept my eyes open even though I couldn't see anything but black. The steps stopped. Then there was another sound, lighter, a soft brushing against the tent fabric, like something testing it. I felt the pressure of it, just barely, against my left side. I didn't move. I didn't even swallow. The brushing lasted a few seconds, then it went silent again. The kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat in your ears. I waited, trying to tell myself it was a deer or some small animal, but the weight of those steps wasn't small. And the way it moved wasn't the way wild animals normally move. Wild animals don't explore things slowly. They don't pause like they're thinking. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staying still through every distant crack of a branch and every soft shift of the wind. I watched the tent fabric lighten as dawn finally came. Felt like I had waited days for that light. When the sun finally rose enough, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, expecting to see nothing. But the ground told a different story. There were footprints, human footprints, around the tent. Not boots, but worn-down sneakers. The dirt showed the tread pattern clearly. They circled the tent twice, then stopped right where I had felt the brushing. The prints pointed toward my tent wall, like the person had been facing it. There were more prints leading out into the trees, toward a thicker part of the forest. They disappeared after a short distance, where the ground turned into a mess of dried needles and hard patches. Whoever it was had been walking quietly, too quietly for someone traveling at night without a light. That realization hit me slowly, and it felt wrong in so many ways. I started packing immediately. My hands shook the whole time, and I kept looking over my shoulder at the trees, expecting someone to step out from behind one of them. The forest didn't look the same anymore. Every space between the trunks felt like an opening someone could be hiding in. I got my gear together in record time and started walking back toward the direction of the car. I didn't run because running felt like it would draw attention, but my steps were fast, uneven, and loud. The air stayed cold the entire hike out, even though the sun was up. I didn't stop to drink or rest. I just kept moving. When I finally reached the car, I locked the doors the second I got inside. I sat there for a few minutes, breathing hard, feeling the leftover fear sitting inside my chest like a weight. I kept thinking about those footprints circling my tent and the way whoever it was had stood so close in the middle of the night without making a sound. I drove away and didn't look in the mirrors much. The road twisted through the trees, and for the first time I didn't enjoy the drive down from the mountains. I didn't feel relieved until the forest was completely out of sight. I never reported it because I didn't know what to report. There was no crime, no damage, no missing gear. Just the clear truth that someone had been out there, watching me while I slept, walking circles around my tent like they were waiting for something. That thought stayed with me more than anything else. Since then, I haven't camped alone again. I still go outdoors, but never in a place where I can't hear other people nearby. I learned that night that the scariest things in the woods aren't animals or storms or noises you can't explain. The scariest things are the people who move in the dark without speaking, without leaving any sign except the quiet pressure against your tent and the clear footprints they leave behind, pointed straight at you. And even now, years later, when I think about that night, I don't wonder who it was. I wonder how long they had been there before I woke up. I was 29 when I decided to spend a late autumn weekend alone in a quiet forest in northern Alberta in 2018. I had been working long weeks and wanted a break from noise, people, and screens. I picked a remote area near a slow river because hardly anyone went there that time of year. Most campsites were empty, and the air had that sharp smell of cold water and dead leaves. The kind of smell that makes you think everything is slowing down, going quiet before winter hits. I parked my old truck near a faded dirt trail and carried my backpack through shoulder-high grass that brushed against my arms and left dust on my clothes. The sky was pale and wide, with thin clouds stretched tight across it. I felt calm at first. There was something about the silence that made me feel like the place belonged to me. Once I found a flat space near the riverbank, I set up my small tent under a group of crooked spruce trees. I could hear the soft water moving, brushing against fallen branches stuck in the mud. I spent the first hour gathering firewood, breaking dead limbs from trees and dragging them into a pile. My hands got stiff from the cold, but I liked the work. It made the place feel like mine, like I was building something steady and simple. When the sun got low, I lit the fire and watched the smoke drift straight up because there wasn't even a small breeze. I sat on a log and listened to the slow splash of the river and the distant caw of some bird I couldn't see. As it got dark, everything around me faded into shapes. The trees became tall black lines, and the grass turned into soft dark patches. I ate a small meal, drank water, and felt the heat from the fire warming only the front of my body. My back felt cold, like the night was leaning against me. I wasn't scared then, just aware of how alone I really was. When I crawled into my tent later, the cold made the fabric crackle when I moved. I pulled my sleeping bag tight and tried to settle. The forest at night has a rhythm. It never goes totally quiet. There are small sounds everywhere. Twigs shifting, tiny feet moving through dry leaves, wind pushing through branches. At first, everything felt normal. I felt tired but peaceful. It must have been around midnight when something changed. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. A pressure in the air that wasn't there before. A kind of weight. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling of the tent. The fabric moved a little, like something brushed against the outside. I held my breath and listened. The river still made its soft sound, but the forest behind me felt too still, too tight. My first thought was that it was just a deer or maybe a fox, but something about the movement didn't match. It was too slow, too controlled. I felt a cold pull in my stomach. I stayed still for a long moment, trying to hear better. Then I heard grass bending very close to the tent. Slow, careful steps, the kind someone makes when trying not to make noise. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe normally. I lay there, staring straight up at the thin fabric. The steps stopped. For a second, everything felt frozen. Then I heard the gentle click of something touching my tent pole. Not an animal sniffing, not something curious. More like a hand brushing against it. The hair on my arms lifted. I thought about making noise or banging something, but I didn't want to move. I didn't want to let whoever or whatever was out there know exactly where I was inside the tent. My heartbeat felt so loud I wondered if it could be heard through the fabric. The steps started again, moving slowly around the tent, circling it. I felt my mouth go dry. Every instinct told me this wasn't an animal. The weight of the steps was wrong. The pacing was wrong. It felt like someone studying the tent, learning the shape of it, learning the size of it, learning where I was inside it. Then everything stopped again. I waited. Minutes felt like hours. My muscles began to ache from staying still. There was no sound at all now, not even the river. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath with me. When I finally gathered the courage to move my hand toward my backpack, which had my small knife inside, I did it slowly. My fingers touched the zipper. At that exact moment, a sharp sound came from behind the tent. Not a step, something snapping, like a thick branch breaking under someone's weight. I grabbed the knife and held it inside my sleeping bag. I didn't unzip the tent, didn't shout, didn't move any more than that. I just waited. A long time passed, long enough that the cold began creeping into my bones. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the first light touched the fabric, I unzipped the tent and stuck my head out, checking everything with slow movements. The ground around the tent was covered in scattered wet leaves and flattened grass. At first it looked normal, but then I noticed a line of footprints leading out of the trees, human footprints. Heavy ones. They walked right up to my tent, circled it, and then stopped at the back before heading toward the river. The prints were uneven and deep, like whoever made them was carrying something heavy. I felt a wave of cold roll up my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I packed fast. My hands shook as I shoved everything into my backpack, not caring about the order. My neck kept tightening because I couldn't stop checking the trees, the river, the tall grass, every shape that looked even slightly wrong. When I finally reached my truck, the feeling of safety that I expected didn't come. I noticed something under the door handle, mud, the same dark mud from the riverbank. Someone had touched my truck during the night. Someone had walked all the way back, maybe checking if the doors were locked, maybe wanting more time to watch me. When I drove away, the sunlight felt sharp and cold on my face. I kept checking the rearview mirror the entire drive, half expecting to see some old truck or person following. Nothing followed me home, but the clear ending of that weekend was simple. Whoever was out there wasn't lost, wasn't an animal, and wasn't some harmless hiker. They knew I was alone. They studied my camp. They circled my tent, and they walked right up to my truck in the dark. They had every chance to do something worse. For some reason, they didn't, but that was enough. I never camped alone again after that. The forest itself didn't scare me. The silence didn't scare me. The darkness didn't scare me. But knowing that someone stood outside my thin tent wall, watching me breathe while I slept, that stayed with me long after I left those trees behind. I was 31 the year I decided to camp alone in the northern part of Idaho. somewhere near a stretch of forest that most people only used during hunting season. It was late September, cold enough at night that the air felt sharp but warm enough during the day that hiking still felt enjoyable. I had been working long hours that entire year, and I wanted a break from screens, noise, and people. I just wanted to be alone with the trees and the cold air and the sound of the wind. I chose that place because it wasn't busy and because the trail was old and rarely touched. That meant more quiet and more space, but also more chances for things to go wrong. At the time, I didn't really think about the second part. I only focused on the quiet I wanted. I arrived late in the afternoon, parked my truck at a small clearing where the dirt road ended, and hiked about an hour into the woods. The trees were tall and thin at first, like they were reaching toward the last light of the day, but deeper in, they grew thicker and more twisted. The ground was covered with dry pine needles, and every step made a soft crunch. The smell of forest was heavy in the air, that mix of moss, sap, and cold soil. I felt good walking through it. My backpack felt heavy, but it was the kind of weight that reminds you that you're alive and doing something real. When I reached a flat patch of ground next to a narrow stream, I set up my tent. The stream was barely wider than my foot, but the sound of moving water was calming. I built a small fire to warm myself while I cooked something simple. The sun dropped fast behind the trees, and the cold came in quick. The forest got dark in a way that felt thicker than night in the city. It was the kind of darkness that feels like it wraps around everything slowly. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up, and lay on top of my sleeping bag for a while, just listening to the wind move through branches. I could hear the stream running on my left side, a soft, steady sound. Everything felt peaceful. Around midnight, I woke up without knowing why. My eyes opened, and I felt a sudden alertness, like my body knew something before my mind did. I lay still, listening. The forest was quiet except for the occasional creak of trees shifting and the faint rustle of dry leaves. The air inside the tent was cold against my nose. I pushed my hand out of the sleeping bag to check the time on my watch. It was 12:17 a.m. I tried to settle back in, thinking maybe a dream woke me, but something felt different. The night didn't feel the same as the hours before. It felt heavier. I closed my eyes again, but a few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Slow ones, not like an animal running through the forest. These were steady, deliberate steps moving through the dry pine needles. The sound was faint at first, then it got clearer, like whatever it was had no problem walking straight toward my campsite. My heart started beating hard in my chest. I lay frozen, my body stiff under the fabric of the sleeping bag. I kept telling myself it was probably a deer or an elk. There were plenty of those around, but the steps didn't sound like 4 legs. They sounded like 2. The footsteps stopped somewhere behind my tent. I held my breath, waiting for them to continue, waiting for anything. For a moment, the forest felt dead silent. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. Then I heard a soft, slow dragging sound, like something was being pulled across the ground. It was close enough that it made the hair rise on my arms. The sound moved from behind the tent toward the left side, near the stream. It stopped again. I didn't move a muscle. I stayed like that for what felt like 20 minutes, though it was probably less. When everything went quiet again, I waited even longer. Eventually, I forced myself to breathe normally. I didn't hear anything else after that, just the normal forest sounds I recognized from earlier. The dragging noise never returned. Eventually, I fell asleep again, but it was a light, uneasy sleep that didn't really rest me. The next morning, I got out of the tent slowly, expecting to see something obvious. The ground around the tent was disturbed, but not in a way I could clearly understand. A few lines in the dirt looked like something had been dragged, but they were soft and broken, not deep. There were no footprints I could easily identify. Animals could drag things too, I told myself. It was probably nothing. I tried to shake it off. I cooked breakfast, though my hands shook a little the whole time. I thought about packing up and leaving right then, but pride kept me there. I didn't want to go home after one weird night. I wanted to at least stay through the evening. So I hiked deeper into the forest for a few hours, following a narrow path that barely looked like a trail anymore. The trees were tighter together there, blocking out much of the light. The ground felt damp, and the air smelled older. I took my time, stopping to look at moss-covered logs, small birds moving between branches, and the way the sunlight flickered in small patches through the leaves. When I got back to camp around late afternoon, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the tent stakes was pulled halfway out of the ground. I knew I had driven it in tightly the night before. It didn't make sense for it to loosen on its own. The ground wasn't soft enough for that. I checked the others and found another one slightly angled, not in the direction I had hammered it. I felt a deep, sharp fear then, the kind that sits in the center of your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Someone or something had been touching my tent while I was gone. I rebuilt the fire earlier that evening, wanting as much light as possible once night came. The fire crackled and threw long shadows across the trees. I kept glancing at the dark spaces between them, expecting movement. The air felt colder than the night before, and the silence seemed heavier. I sat on a log, eating slowly, my back tense. I was fully aware that I was alone, far from help, with no one around for miles. When I finally went into the tent, I left my boots and flashlight right next to me. I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to every small sound. The wind pushed through the branches. The stream flowed. The fire outside burned lower and lower. At some point, maybe around 2 a.m., I heard something again. It wasn't footsteps this time. It was breathing. Slow breathing. Not mine. It came from just outside the thin wall of the tent, close enough that I could hear the steady exhale. My mind raced. Every muscle in my body locked. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I stared into the dark fabric above me, waiting for whatever was out there to make another sound. The breathing stayed steady, like someone was standing still. I felt exposed, like the thin fabric was nothing. It lasted longer than anything else I had heard that trip. When it finally stopped, it ended suddenly. No steps walking away, no movement, just gone. I didn't sleep at all after that. When the sky finally started to brighten, the cold morning light leaked through the tent. I unzipped it slowly and stepped outside. The campsite looked normal at first glance, but when I walked toward the stream, I saw fresh impressions in the soil. They were vague, but they looked like the shape of boots. Not hiking shoes, boots. They led from the area where I had heard the breathing toward the deeper part of the forest. They weren't my prints. Mine were lighter, spaced differently, and led in a different direction. Someone had been watching my campsite that night. Someone had stood inches from my tent. I packed up fast. My hands were shaking so much that I dropped things more than once. The daylight didn't make me feel safer. If anything, it made me realize how long someone could have been watching me without me knowing. The forest, which felt peaceful the first day, now felt like a place that hid things too well. I hiked out fast, barely stopping to catch my breath. Every sound behind me made me walk faster. At one point, I heard a branch snap far back on the trail, but I didn't turn around. I kept moving until I saw my truck through the trees. When I reached it, I threw everything inside and drove down that dirt road so fast the tires kicked up clouds behind me. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 40 miles away. Only then did I finally feel like I had left whatever was in that forest behind me. I never went back to that part of Idaho again, and I never camped alone after that. People always say the woods are peaceful, quiet, calming, and maybe they are. But the thing I learned out there is simple. The woods are also big enough that someone can stand 5 feet away from you in the dark and breathe, and you would never know until it's too late. I was 31 years old when I decided to take a short camping trip alone in late October of 2023. I had been feeling tired of my routine, tired of waking up every morning to the same walls and the same traffic noise. I wanted something quiet, something that felt real. I chose a forest about 3 hours away from the city, near a place called Ridgewater Pines, a stretch of thick woods with old trails and uneven hills. People rarely went there because it wasn't one of those popular camping spots with clear paths and signs. That was the reason I picked it. I wanted to be somewhere where the world felt untouched, where the trees had been standing long before I was alive. When I reached the place, The sky was pale blue and the air had that cold feeling that sits on your skin before winter begins. The forest smelled heavy, the kind of heavy that comes when leaves are wet and the soil is soft from recent rain. I packed my gear on my back, locked the car, and walked deeper into the woods until the road behind me disappeared behind the trees. The silence felt different from city silence. It felt like something watching, something waiting, even though I knew it was just the way empty forests sounded. I chose a spot on a small rise, almost like a low hill with a patch of flat ground. It was surrounded by tall pine trees that leaned toward each other as if they were whispering. I set up my tent, spread out my sleeping bag, and made a small fire with dry branches I found nearby. The smell of burning would always relax me, and for a moment I felt like the trip was exactly what I needed. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped fast. The woods turned dark in a way that felt complete, like all the space around me had been swallowed by shadows. I ate a small meal, sat by the fire, and listened to the distant rustling of small animals walking around in the leaves. It all felt normal, peaceful even. But around midnight, something changed. It started with a deep quiet. Not the normal quiet, but the kind where the air feels thick, like sound itself has been taken away. The fire was slowly burning down, making soft cracks, but beyond that I heard nothing. No insects, no wind through the trees, nothing at all. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise, and for no reason I could explain, I felt like something was close. I wasn't hearing it. I wasn't seeing it. I was just sensing it, the way a person senses when someone is standing behind them even before they turn around. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself it was just me overthinking because of the darkness, but the feeling didn't go away. I added more wood to the fire. The flames lit up the area a little more, and the light flickered on the bark of the trees in a shaky pattern that made everything look alive. A moment later I heard it, footsteps, not soft ones, not animal movements. Heavy, slow, steady steps crushing through the layer of dry leaves on the ground. The steps weren't rushed. They were calm, like whoever or whatever it was had all the time in the world. I froze. My hands went cold even though the fire was still warm on my face. The steps stopped somewhere behind my tent. I didn't turn my head. I didn't move at all. I just stared at the fire because staring into something bright made me feel less exposed. My mind was racing through every possible explanation. Maybe it was a hiker who got lost. Maybe it was someone camping nearby and walking around. But the sound of those steps didn't feel casual. They felt slow and deliberate, like they were being placed one by one with a purpose. After maybe 30 seconds of silence, a new sound came. It was the sound of breathing. Not loud, but close. Too close. It sounded like someone standing only a few steps away, taking slow breaths through their nose. My eyes watered from the intensity of my stare into the fire. I didn't dare look. Minutes passed like that. Just me sitting there, trying to pretend I wasn't there, and whatever stood behind me breathing in the cold dark. My legs were trembling, not from cold but from fear so strong it felt like it reached into my bones. Then the breathing stopped. I didn't know if it moved away or if it was still standing there. I stayed frozen for a long time until the fire burned down low again. I waited even longer, until the chill in the air forced me to move. I climbed inside the tent, zipped it shut, and tried to steady my breathing. Every sound outside felt too sharp. Every small crack felt like a threat. I didn't sleep much. Every few minutes I would hear faint movement somewhere in the woods. Twigs snapping, something brushing against a branch, distant crunching sounds. None of it felt random. Felt like something circling. Felt like something staying within range. When the sky finally brightened and morning arrived, I crawled out of the tent feeling drained. My muscles were stiff and my eyes stingy. The forest looked normal again. Peaceful. Calm. It almost made me feel stupid for being scared. But when I walked around the campsite, I found something that made my stomach twist. There were footprints in the dirt, not boot prints, not hiking shoes. Bare footprints. A full adult's bare feet imprinted in the cold soil and leaves, circling around my tent. They were large, and the toes were deep in the mud as if the person had been standing still multiple times, shifting weight from one foot to another. I stood there staring at them, counting them, tracking the path. Whoever it was had walked toward the back of my tent, stopped there for a long time, then walked slowly around the fire pit, then disappeared into the trees. Seeing those footprints made everything feel more real than the night itself. Someone had been watching me. Someone had been standing only a few feet from where I was sitting, breathing in the dark. Someone had walked barefoot in the cold October forest miles from any main road. I packed my things fast. My hands shook as I tore down the tent and stuffed everything into my bag. I didn't look around too much. I didn't try to see if someone was nearby. I just wanted to get out of that place. The whole walk back to the car felt like something was behind me, quietly matching my steps. When I reached the clearing where I parked, I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost dropped to my knees. I threw everything into the back seat and got in the car. Before I drove away, I looked once more into the trees. They were still, quiet, empty. But on the left side of the dirt road, just at the edge where the shadows began, I saw a fresh footprint in the mud. Another bare footprint, pointed toward the direction I came from. I didn't wait to see anything else. I started the engine and left that forest behind me, and I never went back to Ridgewater Pines again. I still don't know who that person was, why they were out there barefoot, why they moved in the dark without a flashlight, and why they circled my camp in the middle of the night. But I know this: nothing supernatural was in that forest. Nothing magical. The scariest thing, there was simply another human being. Someone who watched me without speaking. Someone who walked around my tent in the cold night like it was normal. I think the silence was the worst part. The way they never tried to talk, never tried to announce themselves, never tried to explain. Sometimes I think that if I had turned around when I heard the breathing, I would have seen a face looking back at me from the darkness. And I'm glad I didn't, because whatever their reason was for being there, I don't believe it would have ended well for me. I left that forest with the feeling that I wasn't supposed to make it through the night, but I did. And that clear October morning was the moment I realized how thin the line is between safety and danger when you're alone in the woods. The world is calm until it isn't. Nature is quiet until something steps into it. And sometimes the scariest thing you can meet out there is not a creature or a monster. It's someone who doesn't want to be seen. That trip taught me one thing: fear is real, and danger doesn't need claws or fangs. Sometimes it only needs footsteps in the dark. And those footsteps are something I will never forget. I went camping alone in the late summer of 2019, a few hours outside a small town in northern Idaho. I had picked a quiet area near a slow river that ran between tall pine trees and thick undergrowth. I wanted peace and silence, something to clear my head after months of stress at work. I drove my old truck down a narrow dirt road that barely looked used, and by the time I reached a small clearing near the water, the sun was already low and the air smelled like warm sap and dry grass. I set up my tent, packed my food in the cooler, and placed a small metal fire pit on a flat rock a few feet from the tent. Everything felt calm, felt like a place where nothing bad could happen. The first night passed quietly. I walked around the riverbank, feeling the cold water with my hands and listening to the sound of insects buzzing and birds calling from deep inside the woods. When it got dark, I sat by the fire and watched sparks float upward into the night. The only strange thing I noticed was the complete absence of wind. The trees stood still like tall frozen hands. When I returned to the tent and laid down, the air felt heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. But nothing happened. I slept fine until sunrise. The second day, I woke up early and went farther into the woods. The ground felt soft under my boots, covered with dead needles and small broken branches. I wandered for hours, exploring the deeper parts of the forest. But as I walked, I kept finding odd things. Not scary at first, just strange. A tree with its bark peeled off in a long strip almost 6 feet high. A pile of small stones stacked neatly on top of a stump. A metal thermos lying in the dirt, scratched up and empty, with no other trash around it and no campsite nearby. I told myself people leave things all the time in the woods. Campers, hunters, hikers. Nothing unusual. Still, something about how fresh the peeled bark looked made me uneasy, like it had been done recently. When I got back to my campsite around late afternoon, I found the cooler moved. Not far, only a foot or two, but enough that I noticed right away. I tried to convince myself I might have bumped it earlier or kicked it without paying attention. But the ground was thick with pine needles, and I would have heard the plastic scrape across the dirt. I tried not to overthink it, but the feeling of being watched crept into me slowly, like cold water sinking through clothes. As the sun went down that second night, I kept the fire going longer than usual. I didn't want to sit in the darkness. The woods around me looked different now, heavier, almost crowded, even though nothing had changed. I ate a simple meal, trying to stay calm, but my hands kept shaking without reason. The forest made tiny noises everywhere. Cracking twigs, rustling leaves, something splashing lightly in the river. Every small sound felt closer than it should. When I finally forced myself to go to the tent, I laid down fully dressed, boots by the entrance flap, flashlight in my hand. Sometime deep in the night, I woke up to a noise outside, a soft crunch like a boot or a heavy foot pressing down on dry needles. My whole body froze. I held my breath, waiting for another sound. Came again slowly, then stopped. I couldn't see anything through the tent walls. I couldn't hear any breathing or movement afterward. The silence felt thick and painful. I stayed awake for what felt like hours until I heard the faintest dragging sound somewhere behind the tent, followed by another long stretch of silence. I didn't sleep again. When morning arrived, everything around the campsite looked normal at first glance. But when I walked behind the tent, I saw deep marks in the dirt, long smudges going across the ground like something had been dragged near the tree line. The marks weren't clean. They were broken by small stones and pine needles, but they were still clear enough to see they weren't made by an animal. They were too straight, too long. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared into the thicker brush. I didn't follow them physically. Something inside me told me not to. I should have left right then, but I convinced myself to stay one more night. I didn't want to feel like I ran away from nothing. I tried to keep busy, gathering more firewood and walking around near the river. But all afternoon, I felt the air tighten around me. I kept glancing back at the trees, expecting someone to be standing there. Every time I bent down to pick up a branch, I felt pressure in my back, as if eyes were fixed on me. By sunset of the third night, I couldn't shake the fear anymore. I built the biggest fire I could, feeding it constantly just to have the light. My heartbeat felt too fast, and my breathing kept coming in short bursts even though I tried to calm myself. The forest made almost no sounds now, which made things feel even worse. It was like everything out there was waiting. When I finally went into the tent, I positioned my flashlight so its beam pointed toward the entrance flap. I laid on my back, staring at the ceiling of the tent, listening for anything. Hours passed slowly, each minute stretching like a full day. Then I heard something again. A slow step, then another, closer. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I gripped the flashlight so tight my knuckles felt numb. The steps reached the edge of the tent, then stopped. I could hear the faintest sound of breathing, not loud, not heavy, just a slow, steady rhythm right outside the thin fabric wall. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My eyes burned from staying open too long. Then the breathing faded. The steps moved away, slowly at first, then disappearing completely into the woods. I didn't sleep at all. When the first weak light of dawn hit the tent, I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't look around the campsite. I didn't check behind the trees. I just threw everything into the truck and drove away without stopping. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone step into the road behind me, but the dirt road stayed empty until I reached the main highway. The moment I hit the pavement, the fear drained out of me, leaving only shakiness and a feeling like I had been holding my breath for days. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. There was no proof, nothing I could show, no detail strong enough for anyone to believe. But I knew what I felt. Someone was out there in those woods, watching me for days, moving things around my camp, walking around my tent at night, getting close enough to breathe a few inches away from where I was lying. I never went back to that part of Idaho again. And even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear slow footsteps on pine needles, even when I'm inside my own home. I remind myself that walls are thicker than tent fabric, that I'm safe, that it was probably some stranger passing through. But deep down, I know the truth. Whoever was out there wasn't passing through. They knew I was alone. They watched me. They waited. And if I had stayed one more night, I'm certain I wouldn't have driven out of those woods at all. I hiked into the northern edge of the Klamath Mountains in late September of 2023, a place where most people never bother going because the roads are rough and the trails are barely marked. I was 31 at the time, feeling stressed from work, and I just wanted a weekend where I could breathe air that didn't taste like the city. The plan was simple: hike 12 miles in, set up camp near a small lake I saw on a topographic map, spend 2 nights alone, and hike back out on Monday morning. I packed light but safe. Extra layers, a good knife, a reliable headlamp, and enough food to keep me running for 3 days. The weather report said cold nights, mild days, no rain. It seemed perfect. The first part of the trail was easy. The forest felt quiet in that normal, peaceful way, with needles soft under my boots and a slow breeze moving through the tall pines. I remember a kind of calm sinking into me as I walked, like I could finally hear my own thoughts again. After a few hours, the trail got rougher and narrower, twisting around old fallen trees and thick bushes. About 5 miles in, I noticed something strange on the ground near a dried creek bed. Footprints that didn't match mine, old but still clear. Not unusual on a public trail, but the shape was odd. It looked like someone had been walking with a heavy limp or dragging a foot. I didn't think too much of it then. I kept going. By the time I reached the lake, the sun was dropping behind the ridge. The place was beautiful. Dark green water, quiet shore, thick trees all around. No signs of anyone else. I set my tent near a cluster of rocks and got myself settled. I remember the way the cold crept in as soon as the sun disappeared. The air felt thin, the kind that makes every sound travel a little too far. The woods started to feel alive in that subtle way they always do at night. Small movements, branches snapping lightly, insects buzzing somewhere out of sight. Nothing unusual, but sometime around midnight I woke up. I didn't know what time it was at first, just that something had pulled me out of sleep. My heart was beating faster than it should have. I lay still and listened. For a long moment there was nothing but the sound of water touching the shore in slow little waves. Then I heard it. Something stepping on dry leaves, slow, steady, like a person walking with control, not an animal moving quickly or nervously. The steps came from the tree line behind my tent, not from the water. I froze. The cold inside the tent got worse, like the air itself had teeth. I waited for the steps to come closer, but they didn't. They just stopped. The silence pushed into my ears until I felt dizzy. After several minutes, I forced myself to breathe slowly and stay calm. I didn't dare unzip the tent. I stayed awake for almost an hour, waiting, listening. Nothing else happened, and eventually exhaustion pulled me back into sleep. The next morning, the lake looked calm and harmless again, but something felt different. The ground around the back of my tent was disturbed. Leaves had been brushed aside in an odd path, not like an animal searching for food, but like someone had stood there for a long time. My first thought was that maybe a deer had wandered around, but the shape of the flattened leaves looked too clean and straight. Felt human. I tried to shake it off. I made breakfast, filtered water, and decided to do a long walk around the lake before lunch. The trail around the lake wasn't official, just a faint track in the dirt. As I followed it, I noticed something else: broken branches at shoulder height in a few spots, all pointing in the same general direction, like someone had moved through the woods recently. Again, it looked like a person passing through, not an animal. About halfway around the lake, I found something that made my stomach twist. In the dirt near a pile of rocks was a footprint, fresh, deeper on one side, like someone putting more weight on one leg. The same odd dragging shape I had seen near the dried creek bed the day before. It meant someone else was up here, and they were moving around the lake just like I was. Only I hadn't heard anyone come in, and I hadn't seen any signs of another camp. The forest suddenly felt too quiet. I felt watched. I headed back to my camp with a faster pace. The whole time I kept glancing behind me, expecting to see someone standing there, but I never did. My camp looked untouched when I returned, but my nerves were tight. I decided I would stay only one more night and leave early in the morning. It wasn't worth sitting alone in the woods wondering if someone else was out there stalking around. That evening, I kept everything ready for a quick escape. I packed most of my gear, left only what I needed for the night, and kept my boots inside the tent so I could grab them instantly. When it got dark, I couldn't relax. Every small sound felt sharper than usual. The air grew colder than the night before. I felt something building inside me. Fear, but also something else. A kind of instinct telling me that something was wrong long before I could explain why. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it again. The same slow steps, not circling this time, just one direction, toward the tent. Step, pause. Step, pause. Leaves cracking softly under weight. My throat tightened. I stayed completely still. The steps stopped a few meters away from the tent. Then there was nothing. No movement, no breathing, no rustling, just silence so deep it felt unnatural. I waited. I forced my hand to move slowly toward my knife. My fingers shook as I closed them around the handle. I could feel the cold metal like it was part of my bones. Then, after what felt like hours, the steps moved again. Not toward the tent this time, but away. The sound faded slowly into the forest until I couldn't hear anything. But I didn't sleep again. I lay there waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. At first light, I tore down the camp as fast as I could. My hands were stiff from the cold and fear. I didn't even eat. I just packed and left. The trail looked different on the way back, like the trees themselves had shifted during the night. The forest felt tighter, darker, even though it was morning. I kept scanning the ground as I walked, and about a mile from the lake I saw them again. Footprints. Fresh, same dragging shape, but this time they weren't heading into the wilderness. They were following the same trail I was taking out. Someone had left the lake behind me. Someone had been watching me, moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped. My chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. I picked up the pace until I was almost jogging, looking over my shoulder every few minutes. The trees felt closer with every mile, the shadows darker even though the sun was high. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't stop for water. I just kept going, trying to put as much distance between me and those footsteps as possible. When I finally reached the dirt road where my car was parked, I felt such a wave of relief that my legs almost gave out. The car looked untouched. The whole road was silent and empty. But as I opened the door, I noticed something on the ground near the back tire. Dry leaves pushed aside in the same pattern I'd seen behind my tent, like someone had stood there for a long time just watching. I got in the car, locked the doors, and drove off without looking back. Not once. In the weeks after I returned home, I kept thinking about that dragging footprint. I searched online for any reports of missing people or hermits living in that part of the mountains, but I found nothing useful. I still don't know who was out there or why they followed me. But I know this. Someone was watching me that entire trip. Someone who moved quietly, someone who kept their distance, someone who didn't want to be seen but wanted me to know, slowly, quietly, that I wasn't alone. I stopped camping alone after that. I still hike, but never without another person. The mountains are beautiful, but beauty isn't the same as safety. And sometimes the scariest thing in the woods isn't a creature or a legend. It's a real person who decides you're worth watching, one careful step at a time, with no reason you'll ever understand. I went camping deep in the northern part of Alberta in late September of 2019, a few weeks before the real cold started to roll in. I was 29 back then, and I had been camping alone for a few years, but always in places where there were at least some distant signs of other people. Cars passing on a Forest Service road every now and then, or the faint sound of an ATV far off in the trees. That trip was the first time I went farther than usual, into an area where my map looked almost empty except for a few thin blue streams and a long stretch of tree line. I wanted peace, but I also wanted to push myself a little to see how I handled real quiet, the kind that makes the woods feel bigger than they really are. I drove most of the day on rough dirt roads until my tires threw dust so thick behind me that it looked like fog. The trees grew taller the farther I went. Black spruce, jack pine, and long strips of poplar. When I finally parked near a narrow clearing, the sun was already low and had that late-day orange color that makes everything feel softer. I unloaded my pack, checked my gear like I always do, and headed about half a kilometer into the woods until the trees opened up just enough for a tent spot. The air smelled like sap and damp earth, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of needles that muffled every step. I set up my tent, rolled out my sleeping bag, and gathered dry branches for a small fire. The whole time, I didn't hear a single vehicle, not even far in the distance. The only sounds were the normal forest ones: the wind pushing through the branches, the occasional bird moving from tree to tree, and the creaking of old trunks rubbing in the breeze. I felt good, relaxed in the way I only feel when I'm away from people and noise. After I finished eating chili heated over the fire, I sat there for a long time just watching the flames twist up between the sticks. I stayed awake until the temperature dropped enough that my hands started getting stiff. Then I put out the fire and crawled into my tent. The first night was calm. I woke up a few times because the cold settled in deeper than I expected, but nothing strange happened. In the morning, mist hovered low over the ground, the kind that makes the trees look like shapes instead of solid things. I boiled water, drank instant coffee that tasted like wet cardboard, and hiked out toward a ridge I'd seen on the map. I walked for hours, following game trails and stepping over fallen logs. The silence was heavy, even during the day. I kept thinking about how far I'd gone from anything familiar, and for a moment that loneliness felt sharp enough to make me uneasy, but I brushed it off. I got back to my camp in the late afternoon. Everything looked exactly the same as I left it. Tent still zipped, fire pit untouched, gear stacked in the same way. I made another small fire and ate again, taking my time, letting the warmth sink into my hands. When the sun started to slide down behind the trees, the shadows stretched long across the clearing. The air cooled fast, and by the time the last bit of light faded, I could see my breath clearly. I put out the fire and got into my tent the same as the night before, pulling my sleeping bag up to my chin. I must have fallen asleep quickly, because the next thing I remember is waking up to a noise outside. It wasn't loud, but it was sudden enough to jolt me awake. It sounded like something stepping on dry branches, not snapping them, just shifting weight on them. At first, I thought it was a deer, maybe even a moose wandering through, which wasn't unusual. But then the noise stopped completely, and the silence that replaced it felt wrong. When animals walk through the woods at night, they keep moving. This felt like something standing still. I stayed frozen in my sleeping bag. My heartbeat was the loudest thing I could hear. I waited, counting seconds in my head even though it didn't help. Then I heard it again, slow, deliberate steps in the needles and sticks. They came from behind my tent, very close, then stopped again. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe a big porcupine or something like that. But porcupines don't take careful, heavy steps like that. Whatever it was, it felt like it was listening. Eventually, after what felt like an hour but was probably only a few minutes, the steps moved away, fading slowly until I couldn't hear them anymore. I lay awake the rest of the night, staring at the dark fabric above me, waiting for another sound. The cold pressed in harder, but I didn't want to move enough to pull the zipper tighter. When morning came, the first thing I noticed was how quiet the forest felt again, but not in a peaceful way. More like the quiet that comes before a storm. I unzipped my tent and stepped out slowly. The ground looked normal at first, but after a few seconds I saw something that made my stomach twist. Prints. Not animal prints. Shoe prints. Human ones. They weren't mine. They were fresher than mine, too, pressed lightly into the soft layer of needles. They circled around my tent once, then stopped near the backside, the same place I heard the sound at night. The prints pointed directly toward the tent, like whoever made them had stood there facing me while I slept. The woods suddenly felt smaller, like the trees were pressing in closer. I kept looking around even though I knew I wouldn't see anyone. The prints weren't deep or rushed, so whoever it was had moved quietly and slowly. Too slowly. I felt something cold spread through me that wasn't the morning air. I knew I had two choices: pack up right away and leave, or stay one more night and hope it was just some random hunter passing through. But the deeper part of me, the part that had heard those careful steps in the night, knew it wasn't random. Hunters don't walk circles around tents. They don't stand still for long stretches in the dark. I packed as fast as I could. Every sound, every twig snapping, every gust of wind felt like someone stepping closer. By the time I got back to my car, the sun was brighter and the cold had lifted a little, but I still kept glancing over my shoulder. I didn't relax until I was back on the highway hours later, surrounded by other cars again. That night, when I finally got home, I didn't sleep right away. I kept replaying that moment when I realized the prints didn't belong to me. The slow steps, the silence, the way they stopped right behind my tent. I tried to tell myself it might have been someone who got lost, someone checking if I was awake or alive. But people who are lost call out. They knock on something. They don't walk in careful circles around a sleeping stranger in the middle of the night without saying a thing. The worst part wasn't even the idea that someone had been out there with me. It was that they never came closer, never touched anything, never left anything behind except those prints. It was like they were waiting for something, maybe for me to come out or maybe just to see if I would. I stopped camping alone after that. I still camp sometimes, but only with friends, and never in places where the map looks empty. I learned something on that trip, something I didn't want to learn. The woods aren't scary because of animals or darkness or strange noises. They're scary because sometimes, without you knowing, someone else is out there too. Moving slow, watching quietly, and waiting for the moment when you finally realize you're not alone. I went on that camping trip in late September of 2022, when the heat of summer was fading and the nights were finally cool enough to feel comfortable. I had just turned 26 a few months earlier, and I remember feeling like I needed a break from the noise of the city. I wanted fresh air, quiet trees, and the kind of silence you only hear when you're far away from other people. I picked a place in northern Idaho, a wide stretch of forest that didn't have any popular trails and wasn't talked about much online. It looked perfect on the map, like the kind of place where nothing would bother me and I could relax for a few days. I had no idea how wrong I was. The drive took almost 5 hours. The last hour was on a dirt road that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Tall grass grew through the rocks, and branches scraped the sides of my car. Every few minutes I had to stop to move fallen logs. When I finally found a flat area near a stream, I felt relieved. The place looked untouched. No trash, no fire pits, no signs of anyone. The air felt clean and sharp, and the water made a steady sound that made the whole forest feel alive. I set up my tent close to the trees because I like having something behind my back at night. It makes me feel less exposed. I unpacked slowly, taking my time with small things like stacking firewood and laying out my sleeping bag. I even washed my face with the cold stream water, feeling that clean sting of mountain cold. By the time the sun went down, I felt peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in months. The first night was easy. I slept to the sound of water moving over stones. I didn't hear anything strange. No branches snapping, no footsteps, nothing. It was the kind of quiet night that makes you forget the rest of the world exists. When I woke up, sunlight was coming through the trees in soft yellow lines. I made oatmeal, washed the pot in the stream, and planned to follow the water deeper into the forest. While walking, I noticed something odd about the trees. Some of them had long, straight cuts in the bark, like someone had dragged a knife or some kind of sharp tool across them. The lines were too clean to be animal marks. They were long, straight, and at the same height on different trees. I guessed it might have been survey markings from years ago, maybe for logging, so I didn't think much about it. But the cuts continued deeper and deeper into the woods, almost like a path someone had made a long time before. After walking for about an hour, I heard something heavy move in the distance. It wasn't fast, and it didn't sound like a deer. It was slower, heavier, like someone dragging something through leaves. I stopped and listened. The sound didn't come again. The forest went quiet, too quiet, almost like everything around me was waiting. I tried to calm myself by saying in my head that it was probably just a fallen branch or maybe a bear far away. I turned around and headed back to camp, but something in the quiet made the hairs on my arms stand up the whole way. When I got back to my tent, nothing looked disturbed. My bag was still where I left it. The fire pit was untouched. I ate lunch, sat by the stream, and tried to push the strange feeling away. But even while I sat there, I kept glancing at the trees, expecting something to move. That second night, everything changed. I fell asleep again to the sound of the water, but around midnight I woke up with my heart pounding. I didn't know why at first. The forest was silent. Too silent. Not a single cricket, not a single movement. Felt like the whole place had stopped breathing. I lay still on my back, listening hard. My tent felt smaller than ever. I could feel every beat of my heart, heavy and loud in my ears. Then I heard it. Something stepped on dry leaves. It wasn't close at first. The steps were slow, cautious, almost careful. They came from the area near the trees behind my tent. The steps were spaced too far apart to be a small animal, but too slow to be a running thing. My throat felt dry. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a moment. The steps got closer, and then they stopped right behind my tent, only a few feet away. I could hear the soft, slow shift of weight, like someone standing still but adjusting their footing. My tent fabric pushed inward slightly, just a small movement like something brushed against it or leaned forward. Not a lot, just enough to make the walls tremble. I stayed frozen. I didn't reach for my flashlight. I didn't make a sound. I felt like any movement would make whatever was outside focus on me even more. I stayed like that for what felt like forever, staring at the ceiling of my tent while the air inside turned warmer from my own fear. The sound didn't come again. Eventually, after a long time, I heard the soft crunch of leaves as the weight shifted back and moved away. Slow steps, fading little by little, until I could no longer hear anything except the faint trickle of water. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I waited for the sky to get lighter, and when I saw the first bit of dawn come through the fabric, I got out as quietly as I could. My legs were shaking. Behind my tent, I found footprints. Large ones. Human footprints. Bare feet. The ground was soft from yesterday's moisture, and the prints were pressed deep, like the person was heavy or carrying something. The shape was clear. Toes arch heel. They were fresh. They circled my tent once, then stopped right behind it, exactly where I heard the breathing and weight shifting. I looked around the trees, half expecting to see someone standing behind them, watching me. The forest felt different now. Not silent like last night, but awake in a way that felt wrong. Like I wasn't alone at all. I packed as fast as I could. My hands shook so much that I dropped things more than once. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone stepping out from between the trees. I didn't bother to clean up. I didn't even check if I left anything behind. I just grabbed whatever I could throw into my car and slammed the doors. On the way out, driving down that rough dirt road, I kept seeing small things that made my stomach tighten. More trees with those long straight cuts. Fresh ones, brighter than the older marks. Some of them were new enough that sap was still wet. The cuts became more frequent the farther I drove, like someone had been marking a path toward my camp. A path that ended right where I had been sleeping. I didn't stop driving until I reached a main road. Even then, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see someone walking barefoot along the shoulder. When I finally got home, it felt unreal. My apartment felt too quiet, too normal. I washed everything from the trip, but I couldn't wash out the image of those footprints, clear as daylight, right behind my tent. I lay awake that night, thinking about the slow steps, the silence, the way the tent moved slightly like someone leaning close. I never went back to that forest. I never even checked the area online to see if anyone else had talked about strange things happening there. I didn't want to know. I didn't care if someone lived out there, or if it was some kind of hunter or hermit or something else entirely. All I knew was that someone walked around my tent barefoot in the middle of the night, taking slow steps, stopping just behind me, and standing there long enough to breathe and shift their weight. The worst part is that I didn't hear them come in. I only heard them when they were already close. And I still think about one thing more than anything else. If they were watching me during the day, if they saw me set up, saw me walk through their trees, saw me fall asleep, and waited for the perfect time to walk up to my tent. That thought alone is enough to keep me away from the woods for the rest of my life. I camped alone on the north edge of Willowbrake Forest in late September of 2019, a place that sat almost 50 miles from the nearest town. I had picked the spot because it was quiet, open, and far away from all the usual noise of people. I was 29 at the time, and I thought I understood the woods well enough to feel safe out there. I had done solo trips before, but nothing as deep as this. I didn't tell many people where I was going, just left a message with my brother saying I'd be back in 3 days. I liked the feeling of being unreachable. The drive-in took hours. The dirt road was rough and broken, with long stretches where tall grass brushed the sides of the truck. When I finally parked near a small clearing, the sun was dropping behind the trees. I set up my tent close to a thin stream that crawled through the woods, the sound of the water low and soft. The air felt clean, crisp, a little colder than I expected. I unpacked slowly, enjoying the steady quiet that settled around me. There were no distant cars, no farm sounds, nothing but leaves moving and the steady trickle of water. By the time the sky grew dark, I had a fire going. I sat on a flat rock near it, eating a simple meal, feeling the kind of peace that only comes when you know no one is around for miles. I stayed up watching the flames shrink, then crawled into the tent when the cold started pushing against my jacket. As I lay there, I heard the usual forest noises, branches cracking far away, owls taking off somewhere, the soft shuffle of small animals near the stream. Everything felt normal, easy, but sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound that did not fit the forest. It wasn't loud, not sharp, but it was controlled, slow, steady steps on ground that wasn't soft. It sounded like someone putting their weight down carefully, one foot, then another, as if they were trying not to be heard at all. I stayed still, breathing slow, trying to convince myself it was just a deer. But deer didn't move like that. They walked in short bursts and paused often. This was different. This was too deliberate. I didn't open the tent or sit up. I just listened. The steps stopped near the edge of the clearing. I could almost feel where the weight had shifted, where something stood still among the trees. My heartbeat grew heavier, louder in my ears. I waited for the steps to move again, but nothing happened for so long that I started to believe I had dreamt the sound. I must have fallen asleep again because when I woke, it was early morning. The fire had burned out completely. The air was cold and damp, and the grass outside showed a thin layer of frost. When I stepped out of the tent, I saw something right away. The ground around the clearing had new marks, footprints, but not the kind made by boots or shoes. These were from bare feet. The dirt was soft enough to show detail, and I could see the shape of toes pressed into the mud near the place where the trees thickened. Whoever had walked around my camp in the night had not been wearing anything on their feet. I followed the prints with my eyes, not my feet. They circled the clearing once, slow and wide, then disappeared back into the trees. I felt a cold feeling in my stomach that wasn't from the morning air. I didn't know who would be out here with no shoes on, walking around someone else's camp at night. I tried to calm myself by focusing on small tasks, boiling water, packing food, checking my gear, but I kept glancing at the tree line. Later that afternoon, I took a short hike around the area. I stayed close, never losing sight of the clearing for long. The woods felt too quiet. Even the birds seemed to be staying away. I walked along the stream for a while, looking for anything that might explain the prints. When I reached a bend in the water, I found more tracks, this time on a patch of wet sand. They were new, clear, and facing toward my campsite. Whoever it was had come from upstream. I stayed out only a little longer before heading back. I wanted to leave right then, but the sun was dropping fast, and the path out was rough. I didn't want to risk driving that road in the dark. I told myself that the person, whoever they were, was probably gone. Maybe they passed through the forest last night and kept moving. That was the only explanation that let me breathe easier. When night came, I skipped the fire. I didn't want light drawing anything toward me. I sat inside the tent with my gear close, my headlamp off, listening to every sound outside. The forest felt different that night, heavier, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Hours passed with nothing but my own breaths and the faint rush of the stream. Then I heard it again. Soft steps, slow, pressing down with weight. But this time, they weren't in the trees. They were already inside the clearing. I felt the ground shift faintly as something moved closer to the tent. I forced myself to stay silent. The steps circled the tent once, then stopped right behind my head. I could feel the presence through the thin fabric. The air outside was still, but the weight of someone standing so close changed the silence. I waited. I didn't move. I didn't breathe too loud. After what felt like minutes, the steps moved away. Still slow, still careful, until the clearing went quiet again. I didn't sleep. I stayed awake until the sky started to brighten. When I finally got out of the tent, the first thing I did was look at the ground. The bare footprints were everywhere, some only inches from where my head had been in the night. The same shape, the same size. They had stopped right at the back of the tent, then turned away. That was enough for me. I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't stop to eat, didn't bother folding anything neatly. I kept my eyes on the trees the entire time. When I reached the truck, I felt a wave of relief, but it didn't last long. As I opened the door, I saw something on the passenger window, just above the handle. A single muddy handprint, long fingers, wide palm, smeared as if someone had pressed it there during the night and dragged it down slowly. I didn't look around. I didn't try to understand who it was or why they had walked barefoot through the woods. I got in, started the engine, and drove down that rough road faster than was safe. I didn't stop until I reached the highway. I never went back to Willow Break Forest after that. I always camped closer to people, closer to noise, closer to anything that made me feel less alone. I still don't know who was out there, walking around in the dark with bare feet, moving so quiet I barely heard them. But I know they were real, and I know they watched me. And that was enough to make me understand something simple and clear. The scariest thing in the woods is never the dark, or the animals, or the stories people tell. It's the person you don't hear until they are already standing right beside you. I had planned this camping trip for months, a break from the noise of the city. It was the summer of 2013, and I was 28, craving some time alone in the wilderness. I chose a small, remote area deep in the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. I wanted to be far from any other people, to test myself against nature, to find quiet. What I didn't expect was how quickly that quiet would turn into something else entirely. I arrived in the late afternoon, my old pickup truck rattling along the dirt road until it ended at a small clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air smelled like pine needles and earth, a fresh, clean scent I hadn't breathed in years. I grabbed my gear: a small tent, a backpack with food and water, a flashlight, a folding knife, and my old hunting rifle, just in case. The first few hours passed calmly. I set up my tent on a flat patch of ground near a little creek. I built a small fire pit with stones and gathered dry wood. The creek's water was cold and clear, and I filled my bottle, drinking deeply. I was careful about everything. I didn't want to leave any trace, so I cleaned up after myself. The sun disappeared behind the trees, and soon the forest was dark except for the flickering campfire. I sat back against a tree trunk and let the silence wrap around me. It was different here. No hum of cars, no voices, just the sounds of the forest. I heard the rustle of leaves as small animals moved, the distant call of a barred owl. I felt a calm settle over me, but as the night grew deeper, the feeling of calm started to slip. The wind picked up, whispering through the branches, making shadows dance. I tightened the straps on my jacket and looked around. Somewhere nearby, a twig snapped sharply. I froze. Could have been a deer or a raccoon, but the sound was close, too close for comfort. I picked up my flashlight and swept it slowly through the darkness beyond the firelight. Nothing but trees and underbrush stared back. The beam caught a flash of movement, a dark shape slipping between the trunks. I thought about calling out, but I didn't want to attract whatever it was. I sat very still and waited, heart pounding. After a few minutes, the forest seemed to settle again. I shook my head, telling myself it was probably just a wild animal curious about the fire. I told myself not to let fear take hold, that I was safe here. But I didn't sleep well that night. Every small noise made me jolt awake. The next morning, I decided to explore a little, following a narrow path away from camp. The forest was beautiful in the daylight, sunlight filtering through the leaves, birds darting among the branches. I walked for miles, careful to keep track of the creek and the landmarks so I could find my way back. On my way back, I noticed something strange near the trail. Footprints. Large, irregular, unlike any deer or bear I'd seen. They looked like human tracks, but the toes were too big and uneven. The prints led away from the trail, deeper into the woods. I followed them cautiously, feeling a chill despite the warm sun. The tracks ended near an old tree, its bark scarred and scratched, like something had been clawing it. I scanned the area, looking for signs of who or what made the marks. That's when I saw it. A makeshift trap hidden among the brush, a simple snare made from twisted wire and string. It was old, but still intact, the kind of thing hunters or poachers might use. My heart sank. This was no normal wilderness trip anymore. Someone else had been here recently, someone who wanted to catch something, or someone. I packed up quickly and headed back to camp, my nerves on edge. Back at camp, I double-checked everything. I made sure my food was secured high in a tree, away from bears. I sharpened my knife and cleaned my rifle. The sun dipped low again, and the forest darkened. That night, the feeling of being watched returned. Around midnight, I heard footsteps crunching on dead leaves outside my tent. They were slow, deliberate, circling the camp. I didn't dare move or make noise. My flashlight was beside me, but I was too afraid to turn it on. Minutes felt like hours. The footsteps stopped suddenly, replaced by silence so thick I could hear my own breathing. Then a faint rustling from the edge of the clearing, like something shifting behind a bush. I grabbed my rifle and unzipped the tent slowly, peeking out. The fire was nearly out, the smoke curling faintly into the night air. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and I caught a glimpse of a figure moving quickly into the trees. I fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked sharply, echoing through the forest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard running fast, heavy steps retreating into the woods. I didn't sleep again. I stayed awake, watching, listening. When dawn finally broke, I packed everything up fast, my hands shaking. I kept the rifle close as I walked back to the truck, eyes scanning every shadow. The drive out was tense. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. But the roads were empty. When I finally reached a gas station on the highway, I called the forest rangers. They listened carefully as I explained what I'd found. The strange footprints, the trap, the nighttime visitor. They said they'd send someone to check it out. Later, I found out from them that a group of illegal hunters had been operating in that part of the forest, trapping animals and even setting snares that could hurt hikers. The rangers caught a few suspects a few weeks later. Looking back, I'm thankful I stayed calm and kept my wits. I was lucky. The forest wasn't haunted or cursed, just wild and sometimes dangerous because of people. That experience taught me something important. Out here, the biggest threat isn't the wilderness itself, but the people who don't respect it or others. I still love camping, but now I'm more careful. I check with the rangers, let someone know where I'm going, and I carry my rifle not just as a tool but as protection. That trip in 2013 changed how I see the woods forever. The silence can be peaceful, but it can also hide danger, and you have to be ready for both. That's the truth I learned in the dark Allegheny forest. Not a story about ghosts or monsters, but about real danger, real fear, and the importance of respect for nature and caution when you're alone.